The security camera footage from last Tuesday shows me having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. I've watched it 17 times now, and each viewing makes my hands shake worse than the last. The timestamp reads 3:47 a.m. There I am, clear as day, leaning against the counter and nodding along to an invisible companion. My mouth moves in what appears to be a casual conversation, occasionally laughing at unheard jokes. At one point, I even hand over what looks like a pack of cigarettes to empty air. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning is where the rules were first explained to me, and the rules are everything at Morrison's convenience. 3 months ago, I desperately needed a job. My previous employer had downsized, leaving me with mounting bills and a dwindling bank account. When I saw the posting for a night shift position at Morrison's Convenience on Maple Street, I didn't hesitate. The pay was decent, better than decent actually, $15 an hour for what the ad described as light retail duties and inventory management. The only requirement was a willingness to work alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Morrison sits at the intersection of Maple and Pine, a squat brick building that's been serving the neighborhood for 43 years, according to the faded sign above the door. During the day, it's the kind of place where old men buy lottery tickets and coffee, where mothers grab milk they forgot at the grocery store, where teenagers pool their money for energy drinks and candy. At night, it transforms into something different, something quieter, something that watches. My first shift started on a rainy Thursday in September. The day manager, Mrs. Patterson, showed me around during the overlap hours. She was a stern woman in her 60s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to notice everything. The store was larger than it appeared from outside, with 6 aisles of merchandise, a small deli counter, and 2 walk-in coolers in the back. The job is straightforward, Mrs. Patterson explained as she led me through the aisles. Stock the shelves, handle the occasional customer, clean the floors, and run the inventory reports. But there are specific procedures you need to follow during the night shift. These aren't suggestions, they're requirements. She handed me a laminated sheet of paper. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Night shift, operational guidelines, strictly confidential." Memorize these, she said. Corporate takes these very seriously. Previous employees who failed to follow them exactly were let go. The way she said "let go" made my stomach clench, but I needed this job. I scanned the list. 1. Check the back storage room at exactly 2:30 a.m., count the inventory. If the count is off by more than 3 items, call the regional manager immediately. 2. Keep the radio tuned to station 94.7 FM at all times. If static occurs, adjust the antenna until the signal clears. 3. Any customer paying an exact change after 3 a.m. should be told we're closed for inventory. Ring up their purchase anyway, but do not engage in conversation. 4. If knocking sounds come from the storage room, wait exactly 60 seconds before investigating. Count aloud. 5. The security cameras must record continuously. Check the feed every hour. If you notice anything unusual, document it in the logbook, but do not review the footage during your shift. 6. Never leave the store unattended between midnight and 4 a.m., even for smoke breaks or bathroom visits. 7. If the phone rings between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., let it go to voicemail. Do not answer under any circumstances. Some of these seem specific, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't change. Every rule exists for a reason. The previous night shift employee learned that the hard way. What happened to him? He stopped following the rules. She checked her watch. I need to leave. Your first customer will probably arrive around 11:30. Remember, follow the procedures exactly. And with that, she was gone, leaving me alone in the fluorescent-lit store with a list of rules that seemed designed more for a horror movie than a convenience store. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I familiarized myself with the register system, stocked the soda coolers, and served a handful of late-night customers, mostly shift workers buying coffee and snacks. The radio played soft rock hits from the 80s, occasionally crackling with static that I dutifully adjusted as instructed. At 2:30 a.m. exactly, I made my way to the back storage room. The door creaked as it opened, revealing stacks of boxes and supplies in neat rows. I counted systematically: 64 cases of soda, 37 boxes of chips, 22 cartons of cigarettes. Everything matched the inventory sheet. As I turned to leave, I heard a soft knocking sound. I froze, remembering rule number 4. Wait exactly 60 seconds. Count aloud. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The knocking continued, rhythmic and patient. It seemed to come from somewhere deep within the storage room, though I couldn't pinpoint the source. 58 Mississippi, 59 Mississippi, 60 Mississippi. I walked deeper into the storage room, following the sound. The knocking had stopped. I searched behind boxes and checked the walls, but found nothing that could have caused the noise. Old buildings settle, I told myself. Pipes expand and contract. Perfectly normal. But as I walked back toward the main store, I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me. The rest of my first shift passed without incident. When Mrs. Patterson arrived at 7 a.m., she found me restocking the candy aisle, trying to look busy and competent. "How was your first night?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Everything went smoothly. I followed all the procedures." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Same time tomorrow." As I drove home through the morning traffic, I told myself that the job would be easy money. Just follow the rules, serve the occasional customer, and collect my paycheck. What could go wrong? 3 months later, staring at security footage of myself talking to someone who isn't there, I finally understand what Mrs. Patterson meant when she said the previous employee learned the hard way. The second week brought the first real test of my resolve. It was Tuesday night, and I'd settled into a routine. The rules no longer seemed quite so strange, just part of the job, like knowing how to operate the cash register or which cleaning supplies to use. I'd even started to enjoy the solitude. There's something peaceful about being the only person awake in your corner of the world, surrounded by the gentle hum of refrigerators and the distant sound of late-night radio. That peace shattered at 2:47 a.m. I was organizing the magazine rack when I heard voices coming from the back storage room. Not knocking this time, actual conversation. 2 distinct voices, one male and one female, talking in hushed tones that I couldn't quite make out. My first instinct was to call out, to ask who was back there and how they'd gotten in. But rule number 4 echoed in my head. If sounds come from the storage room, wait 60 seconds before investigating. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The voices continued, their conversation growing more animated. I caught fragments. "Supposed to be here," and "told you it would work," and something that sounded like, "he doesn't know yet." 58 Mississippi, 59 Mississippi, 60 Mississippi. I walked to the storage room with my heart hammering against my ribs. The door was closed, though I was certain I'd left it open after my 2:30 inventory check. I turned the handle and stepped inside. Empty. No voices, no people, no sign that anyone had been there. The inventory boxes sat exactly where I'd left them, undisturbed. But the air felt different somehow, warmer, as if bodies had recently occupied the space. I checked every corner, looked behind every stack of boxes, even examined the walls for hidden doors or panels. Nothing. Just me and the ever-present smell of cardboard and industrial cleaning supplies. When I returned to the main store, the register was open, not just unlocked. Actually open, the cash drawer extended fully, bills and coins scattered across the counter as if someone had been searching through them in a hurry. I knew I'd closed it properly. I always closed it properly. It was one of the basic procedures Mrs. Patterson had drilled into me. I counted the money twice. Nothing was missing. If anything, there was more than there should have been. An extra $20 bill that I couldn't account for. I documented everything in the logbook as instructed, writing in careful block letters. 2:52 a.m. Register found open, no missing funds, unexplained $20 bill present. The rest of the night crawled by. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the building made me jump. When the morning shift arrived, I was exhausted despite having done nothing but worry for 6 hours. "Rough night?" asked David, the morning manager. He was younger than Mrs. Patterson, maybe 35, with kind eyes and a permanently tired expression. "Some weird sounds from the storage room," I said. "And the register was open when I got back from checking inventory." David's expression changed. "The register was open?" "Yeah, but nothing was missing. Actually, there was an extra 20. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face, as if trying to determine whether I was lying. "Did you document it?" "Of course. Everything's in the logbook." He nodded slowly. "Good. That's good. How are you handling the night shift overall? Getting enough sleep during the day?" It was an odd question, delivered with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I'm fine. Why?" "Just checking. Some people have trouble adjusting to the schedule. Important to stay sharp, you know. Follow the procedures exactly." I drove home wondering what David wasn't telling me, and why everyone seemed so concerned about following the procedures. They were strange, sure, but they weren't difficult. Count inventory, monitor the radio, avoid certain customers, wait before investigating sounds. Simple enough. It wasn't until the following weekend that I began to understand why the rules mattered so much. Saturday night brought my first encounter with a rule number 3 customer. He walked in at 3:17 a.m., a middle-aged man in a rumpled business suit carrying a briefcase. Nothing overtly threatening about him, but something in his manner set off alarm bells in my head. He moved too carefully, too deliberately, like someone performing a rehearsed routine. He selected a candy bar, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water. When he approached the counter, he reached into his pocket and counted out exact change, $2.37 in quarters, dimes, and pennies. He placed the coins on the counter in neat stacks and smiled at me. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" he said. Rule number 3 was clear. Tell him we're closed for inventory. Ring up the purchase, but don't engage in conversation. "I'm sorry, but we're closed for inventory," I said, scanning his items. His smile widened. "Oh, but I can see you're still here. The lights are on. Surely you can help a customer in need." I finished ringing up his purchase and bagged his items. "That'll be $2.37. He didn't move to take his change or his bag. He just stood there smiling, waiting for me to respond to his question. "We're closed for inventory," I repeated. "Is that so?" He leaned closer to the counter. "What kind of inventory do you take at this hour? Food items? Or do you count other things? Things that might have wandered in from outside?" I wanted to ask what he meant, but the rule was explicit. No conversation. I held out his bag and said nothing. For a moment that stretched far too long, we stared at each other. His smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of disappointment or perhaps approval. "Well," he said finally, taking the bag, "I suppose rules are rules. Have a lovely evening. While you still can." He left his change on the counter and walked out into the night. I stood there for 10 minutes watching the parking lot through the windows, waiting for him to return or for something else to happen. But the night remained quiet, and eventually I swept his coins into the register and tried to convince myself that it had been a perfectly normal interaction with a perfectly normal customer who just happened to be a little odd. The radio crackled with static at 3:30 a.m. I adjusted the antenna as instructed, and the music returned. But for just a moment between the static and the song, I could have sworn I heard a voice saying my name. When I checked the security cameras at 4 a.m., everything looked normal. But I noticed something I'd missed before. The timestamp in the corner of the screen kept jumping. 4:15, 4:23, 4:15, 4:31, 4:15. The camera was recording, but time itself seemed confused. I documented it in the logbook. 4 a.m., camera timestamp irregular, audio static at 3:30, customer paid exact change at 3:17, toll closed for inventory as instructed. In the morning, David read my entry without comment, but I noticed him making a phone call in the office before I left, speaking in hushed tones to someone he addressed as Sir. That day, I dreamed of cameras and clocks and men in suits who smiled too much. When I woke up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, even in my own bedroom. The rules were starting to make sense. Not good sense. The kind of sense that makes you realize you're in much deeper water than you thought, and the only way to stay afloat is to follow instructions you don't understand, given by people who know more than they're willing to tell you. But I needed this job. And as long as I followed the rules exactly, everything would be fine. That's what I told myself anyway. The third week was when I first saw him. I'd grown comfortable with the routine by then. The strange sounds, the odd customers, the glitchy cameras, they'd all become part of the landscape, like background noise you stop noticing after a while. I'd even started looking forward to my shifts. There was something addictive about the isolation, the sense of being the sole guardian of a small corner of the world during its most vulnerable hours. But Tuesday night changed everything. I was mopping the floors at 1:15 a.m. when I noticed the man standing in aisle 3. That should have been impossible. I'd been watching the front door constantly, a habit I'd developed after the exact change customer. No one had entered the store. The electronic chime that announced arrivals hadn't sounded. Yet there he was, a tall figure in a dark coat examining the breakfast cereals with unusual intensity. "Excuse me," I called out, abandoning the mop. "Can I help you find something?" He didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. He simply continued his examination of the cereal boxes, occasionally reaching out to touch one with a gloved hand. I walked toward him, my footsteps echoing in the fluorescent-lit silence. As I got closer, I could see that he was older, maybe 60, with gray hair that looked wet despite the lack of rain outside. His coat was expensive-looking, but somehow wrong, as if it belonged to a different decade. "Sir, are you finding everything okay?" Still no response. I was close enough now to see his profile, and what I saw made my stomach lurch. His skin had a waxy, translucent quality, like a mannequin's. His eyes didn't blink. They didn't move at all, just stared straight ahead at the Cheerios with an intensity that seemed deeply unnatural. I reached out to tap his shoulder. My hand passed through empty air. He was gone. Not gone as in he'd walked away, gone as in he'd never been there at all. I spun around searching the aisles, but the store was empty except for me. The electronic chime hadn't sounded. The front door was still locked. I stood there for 5 minutes, waiting for my heart rate to return to normal. Stress, I told myself. I was seeing things because of stress and sleep deprivation. People who work night shifts often experience hallucinations. It was a documented phenomenon. But when I returned to finish mopping, there were wet footprints in aisle 3. I followed them from the cereals to the bread, then to the refrigerated section, where they simply stopped in front of the milk cooler. I opened the glass door and checked inside, but everything was normal. Gallon jugs of milk in neat rows, expiration dates properly rotated, nothing disturbed. I documented the incident in the logbook. 1:20 a.m. Possible intruder in store, no sign of entry. Wet footprints found in aisles 3 to 5, no missing merchandise. The rest of the week brought more sightings. Never clear enough to be certain, always just at the edge of my vision. A woman in a red dress shopping for magazines at 2 a.m. A child reaching for candy on a shelf too high for him to reach. An elderly man standing motionless by the lottery machine. They all shared the same characteristics. They didn't respond to my voice. They moved wrong somehow, and they left traces of their presence despite not actually being there. Wet footprints, moved merchandise, fingerprints on glass that hadn't been there moments before. I started carrying a small digital camera in my pocket, hoping to capture evidence of what I was seeing. But every photo came out normal, just empty aisles and fluorescent lighting. The camera seemed incapable of registering whatever I was experiencing. By Friday, I was exhausted. Dark circles under my eyes, hands that shook when I tried to hold coffee cups, a persistent headache that wouldn't respond to painkillers. I'd lost 8 pounds in a week, unable to eat properly due to the constant anxiety. That's when Mrs. Patterson pulled me aside. "David tells me you've been documenting unusual incidents," she said. We were standing in the store office, a cramped space behind the deli counter filled with filing cabinets and outdated promotional posters. "Just following the procedures," I said. "The logbook instructions say to document anything unusual." "And you're doing well with that. Very thorough reports." She studied my face with those sharp eyes. "How are you sleeping?" "Fine. Are you? Because you look like someone who hasn't slept properly in days." I wanted to tell her about the hallucinations, the stress, the growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. But I also needed this job, and complaining about seeing things that weren't there seemed like a quick way to get fired. "I'm adjusting to the schedule," I said. She nodded slowly. "The night shift can be challenging, the isolation, the unusual hours. It affects people differently. Some adapt quickly, others struggle with perceptual issues." "Perceptual issues?" "The mind plays tricks when it's tired, especially in a place like this with its history." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "Tell me, have you been following all the rules exactly as written?" "Of course. Including rule number 5? About not reviewing security footage during your shift?" I hesitated. I had been tempted to check the cameras after each sighting, hoping to see proof of what I'd experienced. But the rule was clear, and I'd followed it. "Yes. I document incidents but don't review footage during the shift." "Good. That rule is particularly important. The footage can be misleading during overnight hours. Technical issues with the equipment. Better to wait until daylight to review anything unusual." Technical issues. That was one way to put it. "Mrs. Patterson, can I ask you something? What happened to the previous night shift employee?" Her expression hardened. "He stopped following the rules." "But what specifically?" "He stopped following the rules," she repeated, her voice carrying a finality that discouraged further questions. "He became convinced that the procedures were unnecessary, started ignoring them one by one. Within a month, he was—" She searched for the right word. "Unreliable. We had to let him go." "Where is he now?" "I have no idea. People move on, find other jobs, other lives." She checked her watch. "Your shift starts in 30 minutes. Get some rest this weekend. Come back Monday refreshed and ready to work. And remember, the rules exist for your protection as much as the stores." Saturday and Sunday crawled by. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw wet footprints and translucent figures and cash registers that opened themselves. I tried to research the store's history online, but found only basic information. Built in 1981, family-owned until 2019, when it was purchased by Morrison Retail Group, a small chain of convenience stores throughout the region. No mention of accidents, deaths, or anything that might explain the atmosphere of quiet dread that permeated the place after dark. By Monday night, I'd convinced myself that I was simply experiencing the predictable effects of shift work and isolation. I would be more careful, more rational. I would follow the rules and document incidents objectively without letting my imagination run wild. I lasted until 2:30 a.m. That's when I found the storage room door standing wide open and heard voices coming from deep inside. Not hushed conversation this time, but what sounded like an argument. Multiple voices, male and female, all talking at once in urgent, overlapping sentences. I waited my 60 seconds as instructed, counting aloud to keep my nerves steady. But when I entered the storage room, I found something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. A handwritten note lying on top of a box of potato chips. In my own handwriting, it read, "Stop following the rules. They're not protecting you, they're preparing you. Get out while you still can. You don't have much time left." I'd never written those words. I was certain of it. But the handwriting was unmistakably mine, down to the way I dotted my I's and crossed my T's. I stared at the note for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. Some rules I was beginning to understand might be worth breaking. The note was still in my pocket when I arrived for my shift on Tuesday, creased from where I'd folded and unfolded it dozens of times. I'd spent the day analyzing every curve and loop of the handwriting, looking for some sign that it wasn't mine. But it was. Definitely, unmistakably my own penmanship, which meant either I was losing my mind or something was happening that the rules were designed to hide. I decided to break rule number 5. At exactly 2:30 a.m., after completing my inventory check, I went to the office and pulled up the security camera system on the computer. The interface was more sophisticated than I'd expected, with multiple camera angles and a search function that allowed me to review footage from previous nights. I started with the previous Tuesday, the night I'd found the note. The timestamp showed 2:31 a.m. when I entered the storage room for inventory. I watched myself count boxes methodically, making check marks on the clipboard. Everything looked normal until I reached the potato chip section. On screen, I saw myself stop suddenly and stare at something on top of the boxes. My expression changed. Confusion, then fear, then a strange kind of resignation. I watched myself reach out and pick up what was clearly a piece of paper, read it, and put it in my pocket. But here's what made my hands start shaking. In the footage, there was no note on the boxes when I approached them. The paper simply materialized in my hand as I reached toward the empty space. I rewound and watched again. Same thing. No note. Then suddenly there was a note, appearing from nowhere as my fingers closed around it. I scrolled back further to the previous weekend. Friday night, 1:20 a.m., the first time I'd seen the man in the dark coat. The camera showed me mopping the floors normally until 1:15 when I stopped and stared at aisle 3. I watched myself call out to someone, then walk toward the cereal section with obvious concern. But the aisle was empty, no figure in a coat, no wet footprints, nothing but me talking to empty space and reaching out to touch the air. Yet the footage also showed wet footprints appearing on the floor exactly where I was looking, one by one, as if made by invisible feet. I kept scrolling backward through hours of footage, and the pattern became clear. Every hallucination I'd experienced was visible in the security cameras, but not in the way I'd experienced it. The figures themselves never appeared, but their effects did. Moved merchandise, wet floors, open doors, scattered money, all of it happening in real time as I interacted with things that weren't there. Or things that were there, but the cameras couldn't see them. I went back to the very first night, the Thursday I'd started working. There was my orientation with Mrs. Patterson, everything normal and professional. But at 2:30 a.m. when I went to check the storage room, something interesting happened. The footage showed me entering the room alone, but as I began counting inventory, items started moving by themselves. Boxes shifting position, papers rustling, doors opening and closing. And there, in the corner of the screen, was something that made my throat close up completely. A shadow, not cast by anything in the room, but a human-shaped darkness that moved independently, mimicking my actions but delayed by several seconds. When I turned left, the shadow turned left a moment later. When I reached for a box, the shadow reached too. But here's the truly terrifying part. In the footage, I never seemed to notice it. I went about my counting as if nothing unusual was happening, even as boxes moved around me and a dark doppelganger followed my every movement. I printed out several screenshots and stuffed them into my pocket with the note. Then I did something that violated multiple rules at once. I called the number Mrs. Patterson had given me for emergencies. "Morrison Regional Management Nightline," a voice answered after one ring. Male, professional, wide awake despite the 3 a.m. hour. "This is the night shift supervisor at the Maple Street location," I said. "I need to speak with someone about security camera irregularities." "Hold, please." A different voice came on the line almost immediately. "This is Regional Supervisor Williams. What's the nature of your concern?" I took a deep breath. I've been reviewing security footage and documenting unusual incidents as instructed. But the footage shows things that don't match my experiences. Items moving without explanation, shadows that shouldn't exist, temporal inconsistencies. A long pause. "Have you been following all operational guidelines exactly as specified?" "Yes, sir. Every rule, every procedure." "Including guideline number 5 regarding footage review restrictions?" I hesitated. I felt it was necessary to investigate potential security breaches. Another pause, longer this time. I see, and what's your assessment of these irregularities? I think there's something wrong with this location, something that previous management knew about and created the rules to manage. I think the night shift position comes with risks that weren't disclosed during hiring. That's a very serious allegation. His tone remained professionally neutral, but I detected something underneath it, not surprise, but acknowledgement. I'm going to need you to compile a complete report. Every incident, every anomaly, every deviation from normal operations. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. Email your report to the address I'm about to give you. Do not discuss this with anyone else. Not day shift managers, not other employees, not family or friends. Security protocol requires complete confidentiality until we can investigate properly. He gave me an email address and hung up. I spent the next 2 hours writing the most detailed report of my life, documenting every strange incident from my first night through the discovery of the security footage anomalies. I included the screenshots and even photographed the handwritten note. At 5:30 a.m., I sent the report and waited. The response came back within 10 minutes. Thank you for your thorough documentation. Your concerns are noted and will be addressed by appropriate personnel. Please report for your regular shift tonight. New operational guidelines will be provided. Maintain current security protocols until further notice. Regional Supervisor Williams. I drove home as the sun rose, feeling both relieved and terrified. At least someone in management took the situation seriously. But the quick response suggested they'd been expecting something like this to happen. That afternoon, I tried to research Morrison Retail Group more thoroughly. What I found was disturbing. The company had been founded in 1994 and operated 47 convenience stores across 3 states. But according to business registration records, they'd had an unusually high turnover rate in night shift positions, particularly at certain locations. The Maple Street store had employed 14 different night shift workers in the past 5 years. Most had left after less than 2 months on the job. 2 had simply stopped showing up without notice. 1 had been hospitalized for what the local newspaper described as a severe psychological episode. I found the name of one former employee, Marcus Webb, who'd worked the night shift for 6 weeks in 2022. After some searching, I located his social media profile and sent him a private message. Hi Marcus, I'm currently working night shift at Morrison's on Maple Street. Wondering if you'd be willing to talk about your experience there. I'm having some concerns about the working conditions. His response came back within an hour. Get out. Whatever they're paying you, it's not worth it. The rules aren't protection, they're conditioning. Stop following them before it's too late. I can't say more than that. They have lawyers, but get out. When I arrived for my shift that night, there was a new laminated sheet waiting for me on the counter. At the top, it read, Revised Night Shift Operational Guidelines, Level 2 Clearance. The original 7 rules were still there, but now there were 13 additional ones. 8. If you observe yourself in security footage engaging in actions you don't remember, document the timestamp, but do not attempt to recall the missing time. 9. Voices heard from the storage room may include your own. This is normal. Do not attempt to join conversations already in progress. 10. If merchandise appears to move without explanation, inventory the affected sections immediately. Report only discrepancies greater than 5 items. 11. Shadows that move independently should be acknowledged with a nod but not directly addressed. Maintain normal work activities. 12. If you find handwritten notes in your own handwriting that you don't remember writing, read them, but do not act on their contents without supervisory approval. 13. Customers who pay in exact change after 3 a.m. may ask personal questions, provide false information. Accurate responses will result in complications. 14. Time discrepancies in security footage indicate successful compliance with guidelines. Do not attempt to correlate camera timestamps with actual clock time. 15. If contacted by former employees, inform them that you are satisfied with your position and require no assistance. 16. Physical contact with observed anomalies should be avoided. Observed anomalies may not avoid physical contact with you. 17. Keep a personal journal of your experiences but store it off premises. Management may request regular review of all documentation. 18. Emergency contact information has been updated. Use only the provided numbers for work-related concerns. 19. Your shift schedule is being extended. New hours, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., 7 days per week. 20. Vacation time and sick leave have been suspended pending completion of your probationary period. At the bottom of the sheet, there was a handwritten note in Mrs. Patterson's script. Congratulations on your promotion to Senior Night Shift Specialist. Your dedication to following procedures has been noted by corporate management. Please sign below to acknowledge receipt of these updated guidelines. I stared at the paper for a long time. Promotion? I hadn't asked for a promotion, and some of these new rules were terrifying, particularly Rule 16 about avoiding contact with anomalies that might not avoid contact with me. But I also noticed something else. Rule number 12 specifically mentioned handwritten notes in my own handwriting. They knew about the note I'd found, which meant they'd been monitoring me more closely than I'd realized. I signed the acknowledgement form because I didn't see any alternative. But as I did, I made a decision. Tonight I would break every rule that seemed designed to keep me compliant and confused. I would document everything, confront every anomaly, and figure out what was really happening at Morrison's convenience. What I discovered would change everything I thought I knew about reality itself. I started my rebellion at 11:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes after my extended shift began. The first thing I did was set up my phone to record continuously, hiding it behind a display of energy drinks where it had a clear view of the main store. The new rules specifically mentioned keeping a personal journal, so I decided to create a comprehensive audio-visual record of everything that happened during my shift. The second thing I did was unlock my phone's hotspot and connect my laptop to the internet. If management was monitoring my activities as closely as I suspected, they probably controlled the store's internet connection too. I needed an independent way to upload my documentation in real time. At midnight, I sent my first update to a cloud storage account I'd created specifically for this purpose. Day 1 of active documentation. New rules received. 20 total guidelines now, many of which acknowledge the existence of the anomalies I've been experiencing. This suggests management has always known about them, starting systematic rule violations to determine actual purpose of guidelines. At 12:15 a.m., I violated rule number 6 by leaving the store. I'd never done this before, but I needed to see the building from outside during the overnight hours. What I found was disturbing. The store looked different in the dark, not just empty and quiet, but somehow larger than it should be. The windows seemed deeper, the shadows between the fluorescent lights stretched at impossible angles, and the building itself appeared to pulse very slightly, like something breathing. More importantly, I could see additional figures inside. From the parking lot, looking through the windows, I counted 7 people moving through the aisles. They were translucent, barely visible, but definitely there. The man in the dark coat I'd seen before. A woman in a red dress. An elderly man with a cane. A teenage boy in a Morrison's uniform. And 3 others I couldn't make out clearly. All of them were shopping. I watched them for 20 minutes, documenting everything with my phone's camera. They moved through the store like normal customers, selecting items, examining products, occasionally interacting with each other. But when I went back inside, the store was empty. No people, no moved merchandise, no sign that anyone had been there, except for the wet footprints. At 1 a.m., I violated rule number 11 by directly addressing one of the shadows. The man in the dark coat materialized in aisle 4 while I was stocking soup cans. This time, instead of pretending not to see him, I walked straight up to him. "Excuse me," I said. "I can see you." He turned toward me, and for the first time I could see his face clearly. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a sad expression. His mouth moved as if he was speaking, but no sound came out. I pulled out my phone and switched to the voice recording app. "Can you speak into this?" He nodded and leaned closer to the phone. I heard nothing, but when I played back the recording later, there was a faint voice saying, "You shouldn't be able to see us. That means it's starting." "What's starting?" I asked. This time I heard him directly, his voice barely a whisper. "The transition. You're becoming like us." "What are you?" "Night shift workers. All of us. We couldn't leave." He looked around the store with resignation. "The rules keep us here. The longer you follow them, the more real this place becomes, and the less real everything else gets." "How long have you been here?" "Time works differently now. I started in 2018, I think. Or maybe 2019. Patricia started in 2015. He gestured toward the woman in the red dress who was examining greeting cards with intense concentration. "Jerome's been here the longest. Since the store opened, he trained all of us." "How do I get out?" "Stop following the rules, but it might be too late. You can already see us, which means you're already transitioning. The question is how far along you are." At 2:00 a.m., I violated rule number 7 by answering the phone. "Morrison's Convenience, Maple Street location," I said. "Who is this?" The voice was female, elderly, with a strong regional accent. "This is the night shift supervisor. Can I help you?" "I'm calling about my grandson. He worked at your store, Marcus Webb. He said terrible things happened there, but nobody believes him. Is he telling the truth?" I thought about Marcus's message. Get out. They have lawyers. "Ma'am, I can't discuss personnel matters or former employees." "Please. He's been in and out of psychiatric facilities for 2 years. He says people are trapped there, that the store is some kind of prison. Is that possible?" I looked around at the empty aisles, thinking about the 7 figures I'd seen from outside. "Ma'am, what exactly did Marcus tell you?" "He said the rules aren't safety procedures. He said they're designed to keep you there, to make you part of the store. He said the company knows what they're doing, that they're using people up somehow." She paused, and I could hear her crying. "He said he can still feel himself there sometimes even though he quit, like part of him never left." I violated several more rules by telling her the truth about what I'd experienced. She thanked me and gave me her phone number, asking me to call if I learned anything that might help Marcus. At 2:30 a.m., I violated rule number 4 by investigating the storage room immediately when I heard sounds. The voices were clearer this time, a full conversation involving at least 6 people. I could hear my own voice among them, saying things I'd never said about procedures I'd never performed. I burst through the door without waiting and found them all there. The other night shift workers, arranged in a circle like they were having a meeting. They looked up at me with expressions of surprise and concern. "You're early," said the woman in the red dress, Patricia. "The meeting doesn't start until 3:00. "What meeting?" "The daily briefing. We go over the night's activities, plan the next shift's requirements, coordinate customer interactions." She tilted her head, studying me. "You don't remember attending before?" "I've never been to a meeting." Jerome, the elderly man, stood up slowly. "That's impossible. You've been giving reports for weeks. Very detailed reports about anomalous activities and compliance issues." "I don't remember that." "Of course you don't," said the teenage boy in the Morrison's uniform. "They edit the memories afterward, company policy. Can't have night shift workers retaining information about the true nature of their duties." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "What is the true nature of our duties?" Patricia smiled sadly. "We're not employees. We're components. The store needs us to function properly during overnight hours. We process spiritual transactions, things that can't happen during normal business hours when there are too many witnesses." "Spiritual transactions? Look around," Jerome said. "This isn't really a convenience store. It's a way station. People stop here during the transition between life and death. They need supplies for the journey. We provide customer service for souls. That's insane. Is it? You've seen the customers who pay in exact change. Did you notice they never have receipts? That their money appears in the register without being rung up? That they ask questions about things that haven't happened yet? I had noticed those things. I documented them carefully. The rules aren't designed to protect you from us, said the man in the dark coat. They're designed to integrate you gradually into the system. Each procedure you follow makes you a little less human and a little more institutional. At 3 a.m., I violated rule number 9 by joining the conversation already in progress. For the next hour, the other night shift workers explained the truth about Morrison's convenience. The company wasn't really a retail operation. It was a contracted service provider for what they called transitional commerce. People who died in the surrounding area would sometimes become confused during their passage to whatever came next. They'd stop at familiar places, trying to complete normal activities one last time. Morrison's existed to facilitate those final transactions. But why do we need to be here for that? I asked. Because they're not fully dead yet, Patricia explained, and we're not fully alive anymore. We exist in the space between, which makes us perfect intermediaries. The more rules you follow, the deeper you go into that space, Jerome added. Eventually, you can't leave during the day anymore. Then you can't leave at all. How many people know about this? Management knows. Some government agencies. A few researchers who study liminal spaces. The teenage boy, whose name was Kevin, shrugged. But it's all classified. Officially, we're just a convenience store chain with high employee turnover. What happens if I stop coming to work? You can't, said the man in the dark coat. I tried. Got in my car, drove home, went to bed, woke up here at 11 p.m. for my next shift. The job follows you now. I spent the rest of the night learning about the true operations of Morrison's convenience. There were 47 locations because that was the number of way station required to cover the spiritual geography of 3 states. Each location needed a specific number of night shift workers to handle the volume of transitional customers. When people died suddenly or traumatically, they sometimes didn't realize what had happened. They'd go through the motions of their last normal day, trying to buy gas or groceries or lottery tickets. But they couldn't interact with fully living people, and normal stores couldn't process their transactions. That's where we came in. The real question, Jerome said as the night ended, is whether you're going to fight this or accept it. Fighting just makes the transition more painful, but accepting it means giving up everything you used to be. When Mrs. Patterson arrived at 8 a.m., she found me sitting behind the counter reading the operations manual. "How was your first night with the expanded guidelines?" she asked. I looked at her carefully, trying to determine how much she knew. "Educational." "Good. You'll find the work more meaningful now that you understand your actual responsibilities." She paused. "I trust you've already met your colleagues?" "Yes." "Excellent. They're experienced professionals who can help you adjust to your new role." She checked her watch. "Your next shift starts at 10 p.m. Try to get some rest, but don't be surprised if you feel drawn back here during the day. That's normal as you acclimate." I drove home thinking about Marcus Webb and his grandmother's phone call. 2 years in psychiatric facilities because he'd tried to tell people the truth about what happened at Morrison's convenience. But I had documentation now. Photos, videos, audio recordings, detailed written accounts, evidence that even skeptics would have to take seriously. I was wrong about that, as I discovered when I tried to review my files. Every photo was blank. Every video showed only empty store aisles. Every audio recording contained nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of radio static. I sat in my apartment at 10 a.m., staring at hours of documentation that proved absolutely nothing. Even my detailed written notes had changed. Where I'd written specific descriptions of my conversations with the other night shift workers, I found only vague entries about routine customer interactions and standard inventory procedures. The only thing that remained unchanged was Marcus Webb's grandmother's phone number, which I'd written on a physical piece of paper instead of storing electronically. I called her. "Hello, Mrs. Webb. This is the person you spoke with last night about your grandson. I'm sorry, who is this? I don't understand what you're talking about. You called Morrison's Convenience last night. You asked about Marcus. I've never called any convenience store, and I don't know anyone named Marcus. I hung up, my hands shaking. They could edit digital files, apparently. They could even edit human memories. But they'd missed one thing. I called information and asked for Marcus Webb's current phone number. Hi, Marcus. This is someone who works night shift at Morrison's on Maple Street. I got your social media message yesterday. A long pause. What message? You told me to get out. You said the rules weren't protection, they were conditioning. I never sent you any message, and I never worked at any Morrison's. I think you have the wrong person. But his voice carried a note of uncertainty, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Marcus, do you ever dream about working in a convenience store? About following rules that don't make sense? About people who pay an exact change? Another pause, longer this time. Who is this really? Someone who needs to know what they did to you. I have dreams, but they're just dreams. My doctors say they're symptoms of stress-related psychosis. I was never actually employed by any Morrison's company. But you remember it, don't you? Even if you can't prove it happened. I remember a lot of things that didn't happen. That's what makes them delusions. I could hear the pain in his voice, the confusion of someone whose own memories had been made unreliable. Marcus, what if I told you there are 7 other people like you? People who work night shift at convenience stores and now exist in some kind of in-between state. I'd say you sound like someone who needs professional help. But he didn't hang up. Do you ever feel like you're in 2 places at once? I pressed. Like part of you is always somewhere else, following rules you don't remember learning? The silence stretched long enough that I thought he'd disconnected. How do you know about the rules? He finally asked. That afternoon, I drove to every Morrison's convenience location within 50 miles. What I found was a pattern. Each store had the same layout, the same fluorescent lighting, the same atmosphere of quiet wrongness. Each store had a single night shift worker who looked tired and confused and spoke in vague terms about special procedures and company guidelines. And at each store, I could see additional figures moving through the aisles, translucent people shopping for things they couldn't quite reach. I started keeping a physical journal, writing everything down with pen and paper since digital files could apparently be altered remotely. I documented the locations, the employees, the number of transitional customers I observed at each site. Morrison's Convenience wasn't just one haunted store, it was an entire network. That evening I arrived for my shift with a new plan. If I couldn't gather evidence that would survive their technological manipulation, I'd have to find another way to expose the truth. I started by violating rule number 17. I brought my journal into the store. That's not recommended, Jerome told me during our 3 a.m. meeting. They monitor everything you bring into the workspace. Let them monitor it. I want them to know that I know. Knowing isn't enough, Patricia said. Plenty of people have figured out what's happening here. The knowledge doesn't set you free. It just makes the transition more unpleasant. How many people work for Morrison's? I asked. Night shift? About 300 total across all locations. Day shift employees are regular humans who don't see anything unusual. They think we're just quirky night workers who keep to ourselves. And management? Mixed. Lower-level supervisors like Mrs. Patterson are human, but they've been conditioned to accept the situation as normal. Regional managers and above are something else. Something else how? Kevin, the teenage worker, laughed bitterly. They used to be night shift workers too, but they've been here so long they've fully transitioned. They're not human anymore, but they're not dead either. They're corporate entities. I want to speak with Regional Supervisor Williams. He'll speak with you when he's ready, Jerome said. Usually happens around week 6 or 7 when new employees start asking too many questions. I didn't have to wait that long. At 4:30 a.m., a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. A man in an expensive suit got out and walked toward the store with the measured pace of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He was tall, professionally groomed, and completely unremarkable except for his eyes, which were the flat gray color of concrete. Regional Supervisor Williams. He entered the store and walked directly to the counter where I was pretending to organize lottery tickets. "Good morning," he said. His voice was exactly the same as it had been on the phone, professional, neutral, carrying no emotion whatsoever. "Mr. Williams, thank you for coming. I understand you have concerns about your working conditions." I gestured around the empty store. "You could say that. And you've been documenting anomalous activities despite specific guidelines about information security. I've been trying to understand what's happening to me." He nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. "Understanding is good. Acceptance is better. Non-compliance is unfortunate for everyone involved. What happens to people who don't comply? They experience increasing difficulty maintaining connections to their previous lives. Jobs become impossible to hold. Relationships deteriorate. Sleep patterns become permanently disrupted. Eventually, they find that the only place they feel normal is here, during night shift hours." Like Marcus Webb, Mr. Webb was given multiple opportunities to accept his situation gracefully. He chose to fight it. Now he spends his days in psychiatric facilities, unable to convince anyone that his experiences were real, while his nights are spent here whether he wants them to be or not. He's still working here. Part of him, the part that matters to us. William smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression I'd ever seen. "Mr. Webb's physical body may be in a hospital bed, but his consciousness reports for duty every night at 11 p.m. I thought about the teenage boy in the Morrison's uniform, Kevin, how young he looked, how long Jerome said he'd been there. How old was Kevin when he started working here? 16. Summer job to save for college, very responsible employee, followed every rule exactly as specified. And now he's been here for how long? Subjective time becomes meaningless once you fully transition. Kevin experiences it as a few months. External time measures it as 47 years. I felt physically sick. You're stealing people's lives. We're providing purpose and steady employment to individuals who are uniquely qualified for specialized customer service roles. The work is important, and compensation includes housing, meals, and job security in perpetuity. What about their families, their friends? External relationships naturally diminish as night shift workers become more focused on their professional responsibilities. This is considered a positive outcome, as it reduces distractions and improves job performance. Williams reached into his jacket and pulled out a new, laminated sheet of rules. "These are your Level 3 operational guidelines. You've demonstrated sufficient understanding of our actual business model to receive advanced training. Congratulations on your continued professional development." I looked at the new sheet. It contained 53 rules, many of which were horrifying. Customer transactions involving memories require supervisor approval before processing. Transitional customers may offer payment in years of life. Standard exchange rate is 1 year, or $47. If you begin to forget your pre-employment identity, this indicates successful integration. Do not attempt to recover lost memories. Night shift workers who attempt to contact outside authorities will experience increasing temporal displacement until they exist solely during overnight hours. Your physical body may sometimes be observed performing day shift activities you don't remember. This is normal background processing and should not cause concern. "I don't accept these new guidelines," I said. "Acceptance isn't required. Compliance is. And if I refuse to comply?" Williams checked his watch. "Your shift ends in 2.5 hours. I suggest you spend that time considering your options carefully. We'll speak again tomorrow night." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing in the fluorescent silence. I spent the rest of my shift talking with the other night workers, learning more about the scope of Morrison's operations. It wasn't just convenience stores. They ran gas stations, hotel chains, 24-hour restaurants, and other businesses that operated during liminal hours. Anywhere that provided services to people caught between one state of existence and another. The whole economy has a shadow side, Patricia explained. Transactions that can't happen in normal commercial space. We're just one small part of a much larger system. How do I fight something that big? You don't, Jerome said sadly. You learn to find meaning in serving customers who need what only we can provide. It's not the life you planned, but it's still a life. When Mrs. Patterson arrived at 8 a.m., I was waiting for her with my decision. I quit. I'm sorry to hear that. When would you like your final shift to be? Right now, I'm leaving. She nodded sympathetically. Of course. Please turn in your keys and name tag. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file. I handed over the store keys and walked out into the morning sunlight. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely hopeful. I was free. I'd escaped before the transition became permanent. That hope lasted until 10 p.m., when I found myself standing in the Morrisons' parking lot with no memory of how I'd gotten there. I stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to remember driving there. The last thing I could recall was eating dinner at my apartment around 6 p.m. Everything after that was blank. 4 hours of missing time that should have included a conscious decision to return to Morrisons. But here I was, and my shift was about to start. I walked inside to find Williams waiting for me behind the counter. "Good evening," he said. "I trust you've had time to reconsider your resignation. I didn't choose to come here tonight. Choice is complicated when you're transitioning between states of existence. Your conscious mind may resist, but your essential self recognizes where it belongs." I pulled out my physical journal and started writing. Day 22, experienced involuntary return to workplace. Memory gap from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Possible temporal displacement or consciousness transfer. "That won't help you," William said, watching me write. "Physical documentation fails eventually too. The job becomes part of your fundamental reality, and reality is surprisingly flexible when corporate interests are involved." "How long have you been here?" "I started as a night shift worker in 1987. Regional management recruited me in 1991. I've been in my current position for 34 years. Don't you miss having a real life?" He considered this seriously. "I have a real life. I have responsibilities, professional relationships, a sense of purpose. I help facilitate an essential service that bridges the gap between life and death. What could be more meaningful than that? Freedom, choice, the ability to change your mind about what you want to do with your time. Those are luxuries available to people who don't understand the true nature of existence. Reality isn't a democracy where everyone gets to vote on their circumstances. Some people are selected for special roles. You've been selected." I walked to the door and tried to leave. My hand passed through the handle as if it wasn't there. "Physical exits become difficult once you've reached level 3 clearance," Williams explained. "But don't worry, you'll find that you don't want to leave very often." I tried the windows next. Same result. My hands couldn't quite make contact with any surface that led outside the store. "The other workers," I said, "they're all trapped too. They're all employed. Employment involves certain obligations and restrictions. Most people understand this intuitively." Jerome appeared in aisle 6, restocking soup cans with mechanical precision. He looked up when he saw me. "You tried to quit, didn't you?" he said. "How did you know?" "We all try to quit. Usually around week 3 or 4 when the reality of the situation becomes clear. I tried to quit in 1982. Kept trying for about 6 months before I accepted that this was my life now. There has to be a way out. There is, but it's not pleasant and it's not certain." He finished with the soup and moved to the pasta aisle. "You have to violate so many rules that they terminate your employment involuntarily. What happens then?" "Depends. Some people forget everything and return to normal life, but with persistent psychological damage. Others get caught in a loop where they're fired and rehired continuously. A few manage to break free completely, but they usually end up like Marcus, unable to convince anyone that what they experienced was real. Williams had been listening to our conversation. Involuntary termination also carries significant legal and financial penalties, he added. Morrison's Convenience takes employment contracts very seriously. I spent that night testing the boundaries of my confinement. I could move freely within the store, including the office and storage areas. I could access the phone system and internet connection, but couldn't reach any number or website that might provide outside help. When I tried to call the police, the phone simply wouldn't dial. When I tried to email anyone not affiliated with Morrison's, my messages disappeared before sending. I could interact with transitional customers, who became increasingly visible and solid as the night progressed. By 3 a.m., they seemed as real as anyone else, purchasing items I couldn't see for journeys I didn't understand. One customer, an elderly woman who paid for a candy bar with what looked like a photograph, asked me how long I'd been working there. "About 3 weeks," I said. She smiled sadly. "It gets easier. The first few months are always difficult while you adjust, but eventually you forget why you wanted to be anywhere else." "How long have you been coming here?" "Since 1987. I died in a car accident on Highway 34, but I was on my way to buy groceries when it happened. I keep thinking if I just finish that shopping trip, I can go home and cook dinner for my husband." "Your husband, is he still alive?" "No, he passed in 1993. But in my mind, he's still waiting for dinner. Time works differently when you're transitional." I served dozens of similar customers throughout the night. People who died while engaged in routine activities and couldn't quite let go of their final intentions. Morrison's provided a space where they could complete those last, ordinary actions before moving on to whatever came next. The work wasn't inherently evil, it served a genuine need, but the cost to the living employees was monstrous. When morning came, I found that I could leave the store again. Whatever force had trapped me during overnight hours released its hold at dawn. I walked home through empty streets, thinking about the elderly woman who'd been shopping for groceries since 1987. I spent that day researching corporate law and employment regulations, looking for legal loopholes that might free me from my situation. What I found was discouraging. Morrison's contracts included binding arbitration clauses, non-compete agreements, and termination penalties that could bankrupt someone for generations. But I also found something else. Records of wrongful death lawsuits filed against Morrison's Convenience by families of former employees. Most had been settled out of court with confidentiality agreements, but a few public documents remained. In 2019, the family of a night shift worker named David Chen had sued Morrison's after David disappeared while on duty. Security footage showed him entering the store for his shift, but never leaving. The company claimed he'd quit without notice and left through a rear exit the cameras didn't cover. But David's car was still in the employee parking area, and his family insisted he would never have abandoned his responsibilities. The case was settled for an undisclosed amount, with Morrison's agreeing to improve their employee safety protocols. I found similar cases going back decades. Always night shift workers, always mysterious disappearances, always financial settlements that prevented families from discussing details publicly. That evening, I decided to document everything systematically. If my digital files could be altered and my memories might be edited, I'd create redundant physical records that would be harder to manipulate. I bought a stack of composition notebooks and several boxes of pens. I wrote everything down: names, dates, specific incidents, conversations with transitional customers, details about Williams and his corporate entity status. I hid copies of my documentation in multiple locations around my apartment. When I arrived for my shift that night, Williams was waiting again. "I see you've been researching our company history," he said. "Public records, all perfectly legal." Legal, yes, but unproductive. Understanding the scope of Morrison's operations should demonstrate why resistance is futile, not encourage further non-compliance. "How many people have you trapped here over the years?" Trapped is the wrong word. We've provided employment opportunities to individuals with specialized qualifications. Turnover is naturally low in positions where workers find genuine purpose in their duties. I walked to the storage room and found my usual work assignment, a list of inventory tasks that would keep me busy for exactly 8 hours. But tonight, instead of following the list, I decided to explore parts of the building I'd never seen. Behind the storage room, I found a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." It opened onto a staircase leading down to a basement level that shouldn't have existed. The building sat on a concrete slab with no underground space. The basement contained dozens of filing cabinets and several banks of computer equipment. The files were employee records going back to 1981, when Morrison's had first opened. Each record included a detailed psychological profile, employment history, and something called a transition timeline. I found my own file and opened it. According to Morrison's records, my recruitment had begun 2 months before I'd even applied for the job. They'd been monitoring my employment status, my financial situation, and my psychological state. They'd deliberately timed the job posting to coincide with my layoff from my previous position. My transition timeline showed a projected schedule. Week 1-2, basic rule compliance. Week 3-4, visual contact with transitional entities. Week 5-6, direct communication with night shift collective. Week 7-8, attempted resignation and involuntary return. Week 9-12, full integration and memory modification. I was currently in week 4, right on schedule. But the file also contained information about employees who deviated from their projected timelines. Some had transitioned faster than expected, others had resisted longer, and a few had managed to break free entirely. I photographed every page of my file with my phone, then searched for information about the employees who'd escaped. What I found was a pattern. The successful escapees had all done the same thing. They'd violated every rule simultaneously during a single shift, creating what Morrison's called a cascade failure in their employment status. But it was dangerous. 2 workers who'd attempted cascade failures had died during the process. 3 others had been permanently hospitalized with severe psychological trauma. Only 5 had successfully broken free in 40 years of operations. Still, it was better odds than accepting permanent employment. I spent the rest of the night memorizing the complete list of rules from all clearance levels, 53 guidelines that governed every aspect of night shift operations. If I was going to attempt a cascade failure, I needed to understand exactly what I was breaking. At 6 a.m., I made my decision. Tomorrow night, I would violate every rule simultaneously and force Morrison's to terminate my employment. Even if it killed me, it would be better than spending eternity serving customers who didn't know they were dead. Williams was waiting for me at the exit. "You've been reviewing confidential personnel files," he said. I was exploring the building, all part of getting to know my workplace better. "The files you accessed contain proprietary information about transition processes. Unauthorized review constitutes theft of corporate intellectual property. Sue me." He smiled. "We will. But first, we'll give you one more opportunity to accept your situation gracefully. Your employment contract includes provisions for attitude adjustment sessions, very effective at helping resistant employees find job satisfaction." "What kind of attitude adjustment?" "Temporary modification of problematic thought patterns. Nothing permanent, just a few weeks of enhanced cooperation while you acclimate to your new role." "Brainwashing." "Human resources management. Every company has training programs to help employees succeed in their positions." I looked around the store one more time, at the fluorescent lights and the endless rows of merchandise, at Jerome restocking shelves with mechanical precision, at Patricia organizing magazines she'd already organized 100 times before. "I'll take my chances with cascade failure." Williams nodded as if he'd expected this response. "Of course. We'll see you tomorrow night." But as I walked toward my car, I realized he was wrong about one thing. He wouldn't see me tomorrow night because by tomorrow night either I'd be free or I'd be dead. Either way, I wouldn't be working the night shift at Morrison's convenience anymore. I spent my last day of freedom preparing for cascade failure. The process was simple in theory: violate every operational guideline simultaneously during a single shift, creating a contradiction cascade that would force Morrison's system to terminate my employment rather than risk compromising their entire operation. In practice, it required precise timing and complete commitment to actions that might result in my death. I wrote letters to my family explaining everything, though I knew they'd probably never believe the story. I filmed a video testament describing Morrison's operations and uploaded it to multiple platforms with delayed publication dates. If I disappeared, at least there would be some record of what had happened to me. At 9:30 p.m., I drove to Morrison's for what I hoped would be my final shift. Williams was waiting in the parking lot, standing beside a black van with tinted windows. "Good evening," he said. "I trust you've reconsidered your plans for tonight." "Actually, I've refined them." He gestured toward the van. "We've arranged alternative accommodations for your attitude adjustment session. Much more comfortable than conducting the process in-store." "I decline your generous offer." It wasn't an offer. Two men in dark suits emerged from the van and walked toward me. They moved with the same measured pace as Williams, their expressions blank and professional. I ran. Morrison sat on a corner lot with limited escape routes, but I'd spent days planning for this possibility. I sprinted toward the alley behind the building, where I'd hidden a bicycle that morning. Behind me, I heard Williams speaking in a calm voice. "Subject is attempting to evade attitude adjustment. Implement containment protocol." The bicycle was still there. I rode hard through residential streets, taking a circuitous route to throw off any pursuit. But after 20 minutes of random turns and backtracking, I found myself approaching Morrison's from the opposite direction. I hadn't consciously chosen to return. My hands had steered the bicycle toward the store without consulting my mind. Williams was standing in front of the building, checking his watch. "Containment protocol includes localized reality modification," he explained as I approached. "Within a 12-mile radius of any Morrison's location, night shift employees experience increasing difficulty maintaining distance from their assigned workplace during scheduled hours. You're bending space-time to trap people in retail jobs. We're using available technologies to ensure reliable staffing. The methods aren't important, the results are." I climbed off the bicycle and faced a choice: get in the van for attitude adjustment, or enter the store and attempt cascade failure while Williams watched. I chose cascade failure. "Interesting," Williams said as I walked past him toward the entrance. "Most employees who reach this decision point prefer attitude adjustment to potential death. Maybe that's what makes it cascade failure instead of attitude adjustment." I entered the store at exactly 10 p.m. and immediately began violating rules. I turned off the radio, Rule 2, keep station 94.7 FM on at all times. I propped open the front door with a shopping basket. Rule 6, never leave the store unattended between midnight and 4 a.m. I called the police on the store phone. Rule 7, if phone rings between 2-3 a.m., let it go to voicemail. Rule 18, use only provided numbers for work-related concerns. 911, what's your emergency? I'm being held against my will at Morrison's Convenience on Maple Street. Corporate management is using illegal detention methods to force compliance with employment contracts. The operator took my information and promised to send a patrol car. I knew it wouldn't matter. Morrison's had dealt with law enforcement before. But rule violation was the point, not practical results. I walked to the storage room without waiting for sounds. Rule 4, if knocking sounds come from storage room, wait 60 seconds before investigating. I reviewed security camera footage on the office computer. Rule 5, do not review footage during your shift. I engaged transitional customers in detailed conversations about their personal histories. Rule 3, do not engage in conversation with customers paying exact change after 3 a.m. By 11 p.m., I'd violated 47 of the 53 operational guidelines. The store began to react. Fluorescent lights flickered randomly. The cash register opened and closed by itself. Temperature fluctuated between freezing and sweltering. Products fell from shelves without being touched. The radio played static interspersed with voices speaking in languages that didn't exist. Jerome appeared in aisle 6. His usual calm expression replaced by panic. "You need to stop," he said. "The whole system is destabilizing." That's the point. You don't understand. If Morrison's local reality matrix collapses, Everyone connected to it gets pulled down too. All the night shift workers, all the transitional customers, everyone who's ever worked here. I hesitated. I hadn't considered that my escape might harm the other trapped employees. There has to be another way to help everyone. There isn't. This is the only way the system works. Some people serve so others can transition peacefully. It's not fair, but fairness isn't really an option when you're dealing with the infrastructure of death. Patricia appeared beside him, followed by Kevin and the man in the dark coat. "Please," Patricia said, "we've found peace in our work. Don't destroy that for the sake of your freedom." But as she spoke, I noticed something that changed everything. Her eyes were different. Not the resigned sadness I'd seen before, but active fear. Fear that she might be freed from Morrison's against her will. They weren't trapped. They were hiding. "You can leave any time you want," I said. "You choose to stay here." Jerome nodded slowly. After a while, the outside world becomes too complicated. Too much change. Too many decisions. Here, we have purpose and routine. We help people complete their final transactions before moving on. It's meaningful work. But you could quit if you wanted to. Of course, but where would we go? What would we do? We've been here so long that normal life doesn't fit anymore. I understood then that Morrison's wasn't a prison. It was a refuge. A place where people who couldn't cope with the complexity of modern existence could find structure and meaning, even if that meaning involved serving dead customers. But I still wanted out. I violated the final 6 rules rapidly. I attempted to contact former employees, Rule 15. I touched a transitional customer directly, Rule 16. I disclosed confidential information to an external person, Rule 17. I left my journal unattended, Rule 17. I answered the phone during restricted hours, Rule 7, and I attempted to leave during core operational periods, Rule 6. The store began to scream, not audibly. The sound came from somewhere deeper than hearing. Reality itself was protesting the cascade of contradictions I'd created. The walls rippled like water, the floor tilted at impossible angles. Time moved backward and forward simultaneously, creating overlapping moments where I could see myself performing the same actions from multiple temporal perspectives. Williams appeared in the center of the chaos, still maintaining his professional composure despite standing in a convenience store that was collapsing into quantum foam. "Fascinating," he said. "Most employees attempt cascade failure gradually, over several days. Your approach is much more dramatic. Is it working?" "Oh, yes. Your employment status is being terminated as we speak. The system can't maintain coherence while you violate fundamental operational parameters." "What happens to the other workers?" "Nothing. They're voluntary employees who find satisfaction in their duties. Your departure won't affect their employment status." The screaming stopped. The store stabilized. Everything returned to normal except for one crucial detail. I could see the front door clearly, and it was no longer translucent. I walked outside into the parking lot without resistance. Williams followed me. "Congratulations on your successful termination. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file. That's it. I'm free. You're free to leave Morrison's convenience. However, your experiences here may create difficulties integrating with normal employment situations. We recommend therapy to process any lingering concerns about workplace reality." I got in my car and drove home, expecting at any moment to find myself turning around and heading back to the store. But the compulsion was gone. For the first time in weeks, I had complete control over my actions. The next morning, I called in sick to Morrison's. Mrs. Patterson expressed concern for my health and hoped I'd feel better soon. There was no mention of termination or cascade failure. I never returned to work there. 6 months later, I received a letter from Morrison's Human Resources. "Dear former employee, we hope this letter finds you well and successfully employed in a position that meets your professional needs. Morrison's Convenience values all former employees and appreciates your service during your time with our organization. If you ever wish to discuss opportunities for re-employment, please don't hesitate to contact us. Sincerely, Morrison's Human Resources Department. I threw the letter away, but sometimes I still drive past the store late at night. Through the windows, I can see Jerome stocking shelves, Patricia organizing magazines, and Kevin working the register. They look content, peaceful even. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. But then I remember the security camera footage of myself talking to someone who wasn't there, and I'm grateful to be free, even if freedom means dealing with a world that's complicated and unpredictable and sometimes terrifyingly normal. At least my choices are my own now, and that's worth any amount of complexity. Final entry from my Morrison's journal. Day 28. Successfully terminated employment through cascade failure. No apparent negative effects, except persistent insomnia and occasional hallucinations of fluorescent lighting. Note: if anyone reads this and currently works night shift at any Morrison's location, the rules exist for a reason. Follow them exactly, or be prepared for consequences. The choice is yours, but make sure it really is your choice. Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Night Story, and welcome to tonight's journey toward peaceful sleep. If you're enjoying this content, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment to like this video. I'd also love to hear from you. Please feel free to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your kind support truly helps me continue creating these relaxing experiences for you. Now, please make yourself comfortable as we gently begin tonight's journey to restful sleep.
The year 2020 had been merciless. By late October, I had grown weary of the isolation, the constant stream of bad news, and the disappointment that followed the cancellation of every significant milestone that should have marked my senior year. Our graduation ceremony, reduced to a drive-through event where we collected our diplomas through car windows while wearing masks, felt like the final insult. Some of my classmates didn't even participate in the online classes, meaning they didn't graduate at all. The pandemic had stolen something irreplaceable from us. As Halloween approached, I found myself staring at my bedroom ceiling, scrolling through old photos from previous celebrations. The idea formed gradually. What if we could reclaim some normalcy, even for just one night? I knew it was against regulations. The social distancing mandates were clear. But after months of compliance and sacrifice, my patience had worn thin. We needed this. My apartment wasn't suitable. The last party I'd hosted resulted in several valuable items disappearing. I needed a different location, somewhere isolated enough to avoid complaints, but comfortable enough to host a small group. I opened Discord and messaged my closest friends about potential venues. My girlfriend Leanne immediately responded with enthusiasm, but had no suggestions. It was her friend Sam who offered the solution during our video call later that evening. "What about that cabin your third cousin owns?" Sam suggested, her face illuminated by blue screen light. "The one in the pine forest?" "Why are you so interested?" I asked, surprised by her eagerness. Sam's expression brightened. "Think about it. It's Halloween, a blue moon, on a Saturday, during the weirdest year of our lives. Plus, I finally got time off work. It's perfect." She made compelling points. My third cousin Lance had moved to California months ago for a teaching position, leaving his remote property vacant except for occasional visits from his husband Francis. The cabin sat on nearly 6 acres of woodland, far enough from neighbors to avoid noise complaints. I sent Francis a message asking for permission, not expecting a quick response. To my surprise, he replied within minutes. "Sure, just don't trash the place, and no alcohol." The latter stipulation made me hesitate. What's a Halloween party without drinks? But I sent back my agreement anyway. With location secured, I created a group chat with the invitation details. I kept the list small. Cameron, who'd been my friend since middle school. Adam, who I knew from my computer science classes. Leanne, my girlfriend of 2 years. And Sam, who had become part of our circle through Leanne. 5 people total, small enough to be relatively safe, large enough to feel like a real celebration. The responses came quickly. Everyone was in. As I made preparations over the next few days, I couldn't shake a persistent uneasiness. The last time I'd visited Lance's cabin 2 years ago, I'd experienced something disturbing in those woods. Something I'd tried to rationalize away, but never quite could. I hadn't told many people about it, certainly not in detail. Only Leanne knew the full story, though I'd mentioned it vaguely to the others. Would returning there be tempting fate? I pushed the thought aside. Whatever I'd seen or thought I'd seen before was probably just wildlife, my imagination enhanced by darkness and solitude. With friends around, there would be nothing to fear. How catastrophically wrong I would prove to be. The drive to the cabin took just under 2 hours, winding through increasingly remote countryside as suburban developments gave way to scattered farms, then to dense woodland. Cell service became spotty 15 minutes before I reached my destination, and I made mental note to warn the others. I arrived first, as planned, to prepare the space. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. A wraparound porch circled the structure, and large windows reflected the afternoon sunlight. Despite its rustic charm, the isolation struck me immediately. The nearest neighbor was at least 2 miles away. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires as I parked. When I cut the engine, the silence was complete. No traffic noise, no distant conversations, not even the ambient hum of electricity that forms the background soundtrack of urban life. Just the occasional whisper of wind through pine needles and the calls of birds I couldn't identify. I retrieved the key from beneath a false rock in the garden, just where Francis had said it would be, and entered the cabin. The door hinges protested with a drawn-out creak that seemed to echo through the silent rooms. The air inside smelled of wood and dust, with undertones of the pine forest that surrounded us. The main living area featured a stone fireplace, flanked by bookshelves filled with outdated field guides and dog-eared paperbacks. A large sectional sofa faced the fireplace, and a wooden dining table with 6 chairs occupied the adjacent space. The kitchen, though small, was well equipped, and a hallway led to 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. I began unloading supplies from my car. Snacks, decorations, sodas, and, despite my promise to Francis, a significant quantity of alcohol hidden in innocent-looking grocery bags. As I arranged everything, I continued to feel a strange disquiet. The cabin seemed to absorb sound in a way that made every footstep, every movement, feel muffled and distant. Outside, the afternoon light was already beginning to fade. October days were short this far north, and the tall pines surrounding the property accelerated the transition to darkness. I turned on every light in the cabin, pushing back against the growing shadows. I unpacked my steampunk plague doctor costume, a full-face leather mask with glass eye lenses and an extended beak, a black wide-brimmed hat, a long coat, and gloves. I'd ordered it months ago as a darkly ironic nod to the pandemic. As I laid it out on my bed, I caught a glimpse of movement through the bedroom window. I approached the glass and peered out into the growing gloom. Nothing moved in the tree line, at least nothing I could see. Yet the sense of being observed persisted, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the cabin's warmth. I quickly stepped away from the window and continued my preparations, attributing the sensation to memories of my previous experience here. By the time I finished setting up, the forest had been swallowed by darkness except where the cabin's exterior lights carved yellow pools into the night. The party decorations, fake cobwebs, plastic skeletons, and battery-operated candles transformed the rustic interior into something appropriately spooky yet inviting. A text message notification broke the silence. Cameron was 20 minutes away. The others would arrive shortly thereafter. I took a deep breath, put on some music to fill the unsettling quiet, and tried to focus on the celebration ahead, rather than the darkness pressing against the windows, and the persistent feeling that something waited beyond the light's reach. The sound of tires on gravel announced Cameron's arrival. I stepped onto the porch as his headlights swept across the front of the cabin, briefly illuminating the surrounding trees. He emerged from his car wearing one of those LED purge masks that had become popular in recent years, the eerie blue glow distorting his features. "Nice place," he said, removing the mask as he approached. "Isolated enough that no one will call the cops on us." He handed me a 6-pack of hard cider. "Brought provisions." "Perfect," I said, helping him unload more drinks from his trunk. "The others should be here soon." We had barely finished storing the alcohol when Leanne's car appeared on the winding driveway. She stepped out wearing her little Red Riding Hood costume, a modernized version with a short red dress, knee-high boots, and a hooded cape that fell to her waist. Very appropriate for the woods, I noted as I embraced her. I thought so, she replied, looking around at our surroundings. Though maybe not the most comfortable choice for running from predators. I laughed, but her words sent an involuntary shiver through me. Let's hope you won't need to. Sam arrived 15 minutes later in a car she'd borrowed from her parents. Her anime catgirl costume, complete with ears, tail, and painted whiskers, seemed jarringly childish compared to the imposing darkness of the forest around us. "This place is amazing," she exclaimed, spinning in a circle to take in the cabin and surrounding woods. "Exactly how I imagined it from your descriptions." Adam was the last to arrive, pulling up in his pickup truck just after sunset. His zombie soldier costume was impressively detailed, with tattered military fatigues and professionally applied makeup that made his skin appear decayed. He carried a duffel bag over his shoulder that seemed unusually heavy. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Got lost twice. GPS is useless out here." With everyone present, the party properly began. We gathered in the living room where I had set up a makeshift bar on a side table. Cameron connected his phone to the portable speaker I'd brought, filling the cabin with music. The combination of alcohol, familiar company, and the isolation from the outside world created a bubble of normalcy that we had all been craving. As the evening progressed, we played drinking games, shared stories, and allowed ourselves to forget temporarily about the chaos of the outside world. By midnight, we had transitioned to watching horror movies on the laptop I'd brought along, the fictional scares providing a comfortable distance from real-world anxieties. During a break between films, Sam turned to me with curious eyes. "So, Javier, you never really told us the full story about what happened to you here before." The room grew quieter as the others tuned in. I took a long sip of my drink, considering how much to share. The alcohol had loosened my inhibitions enough that the experience no longer seemed too embarrassing to discuss. "It was 2 years ago," I began. "Lance invited me up here to help him install some new fixtures. I stayed an extra day after he left to do some hiking. I was completely alone." "That's already a horror movie setup," Cameron interjected. I nodded. It was getting dark, and I was heading back to the cabin when I heard something following me on the trail. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a coyote. "But it wasn't?" Leanne prompted, though she already knew the story. "No. Whatever was following me was big. When I stopped walking, it stopped too. When I moved, it moved. It was mimicking me, stalking me." The memory sent another wave of discomfort through me. I finally caught a glimpse of it between the trees. It was tall, at least 6 feet, moving on all fours with a strange, fluid motion that didn't look natural. "Like a bear?" Adam suggested. "Bears don't stalk people like that," I said. "And it had a long snout and tail. In the dark, with just my flashlight, it looked..." I hesitated. "Like a werewolf," Sam finished for me, her eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. "I know how it sounds," I said defensively. "I was alone. It was dark, and I was scared. But I know I saw something." "Did you report it?" Adam asked. "To who? The forest ranger?" "Excuse me, I'd like to report a werewolf sighting." I shook my head. I convinced myself it was just a wolf or a coyote, maybe a mountain lion, and my imagination filled in the rest. "But you don't really believe that," Sam pressed. I met her gaze. "I don't know what I saw," I admitted. "But whatever it wasn't a normal animal." The conversation shifted to other topics as we started the next movie, but I noticed Sam's thoughtful expression. She kept glancing toward the windows, where our reflections were superimposed over the impenetrable darkness outside. The horror movie marathon continued past 2 a.m., our nerves frayed by fictional terrors while real darkness pressed against the cabin windows. We had progressed from beer and cider to stronger drinks, and the combination of alcohol and adrenaline from jump scares had created a peculiar atmosphere, half giddy, half tense. During a particularly gruesome scene in the third Saw film, Sam abruptly stood up. "I need some air," she announced, stretching dramatically. "There's plenty of it on the porch," I suggested, not taking my eyes off the screen. "No, I mean real air. Forest air." She moved toward the door, grabbing her jacket. "Plus, it's a blue moon on Halloween. When else will I get a chance to experience that?" Leanne sat forward. "You're not going out there alone, are you?" "It's just woods," Sam replied with exaggerated casualness that didn't quite mask her excitement. Besides, I want to see if I can spot Javier's werewolf. I turned to her then, alarmed by the recklessness in her voice. That's a terrible idea. It's past 2 in the morning, we've been drinking, and it's easy to get lost out there. I'm not going far, she insisted, just down the driveway a bit. The last time I was here, I said firmly, I encountered something dangerous. I wasn't making that up for entertainment. Sam rolled her eyes. It was probably just a big dog. It wasn't a dog. My voice came out sharper than intended. Look, if you want to go wandering around in the dark forest by yourself, be my guest. But if you get attacked or lost, don't expect me to come running after you. I had hoped to scare her into staying, but Sam's expression only brightened with challenge. Fine. I'll be back in 15 minutes. With that, she slipped out the door before anyone could stop her. We returned our attention to the movie, but my focus was broken. Every few minutes I glanced toward the door, expecting Sam to return with her adventure aborted. When 10 minutes passed with no sign of her, uneasiness began to build in my stomach. She should have been back by now, Leanne said, voicing my concerns. She moved to the window, trying to peer into the darkness. I can't see anything out there. She's probably just trying to scare us, Cameron suggested, but his tone lacked conviction. Another 5 minutes passed, then 10. The movie ended, and still no Sam. Something's wrong, Leanne said, reaching for her jacket. We need to find her. Cameron nodded in agreement, already pulling on his shoes. Adam looked uncomfortable. Maybe I should stay here in case she comes back. Under normal circumstances, I might have accused him of cowardice, but his suggestion was practical. Good idea. If we all go searching and she returns to an empty cabin, she'll think we abandoned her. Take this, Adam said, reaching into his duffel bag and pulling out a hunting rifle that instantly silenced the room. Why did you bring that? I asked, startled. I always bring protection when I go to remote areas, he replied with a shrug, but I think you should take it. I hesitated before declining. No, you keep it here. We'll take flashlights. I didn't mention that my hands were shaking too much to trust myself with a firearm. We gathered our flashlights and cell phones, though I warned that reception was non-existent beyond the clearing. I put on my plague doctor mask for warmth. Its leather would shield my face from branches, while Cameron donned his purge mask with its built-in light. Leanne pulled up her red hood. Before stepping outside, I turned to Adam. If we're not back in an hour, call for help. I didn't specify what kind of help might be available in these remote woods, and he didn't ask. The night air hit us with shocking coldness after the cabin's warmth. Our breath formed clouds in the beam of our flashlights. The moon, full and tinged slightly blue as promised, provided minimal illumination through the dense canopy. Sam! Leanne called, her voice seeming small against the vastness of the forest. We moved down the gravel driveway, calling periodically and sweeping our lights across the underbrush. The further we went from the cabin, the more oppressive the silence became, broken only by our footsteps and calls. The forest seemed to absorb sound in an unnatural way, as if it were listening, waiting. I don't like this, Cameron muttered after we'd walked about a quarter mile. Neither did I, but I kept that thought to myself. Instead, I focused on scanning the woods for any sign of movement, any flash of Sam's reflective costume elements. Then I heard it, a soft rustling to our right, just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Did you hear that? I whispered, directing my flashlight toward the sound. Cameron nodded, the blue glow of his mask making his gesture ghostly. Could be Sam. Sam! Leanne called again, louder this time. This isn't funny anymore. No response came, but the rustling continued, moving parallel to us. Something was keeping pace with our progress down the road. I fought the rising panic in my chest, focusing instead on rational explanations. Wind in the branches, a raccoon or a possum, perhaps a deer watching us cautiously from the safety of the trees. But when we stopped walking, the rustling stopped too, just as it had 2 years ago. Turn off your flashlights, I instructed, my voice tight. What? Why would we? Cameron began. Just do it, I insisted. Trust me. Reluctantly, they complied. The darkness that engulfed us was absolute. The moon, despite being full, provided little illumination through the dense canopy of pine branches overhead. As my eyes adjusted, I could barely make out Leanne's silhouette beside me. We stood in silence for nearly a minute. My ears strained against the quiet, picking up the soft whisper of wind, the distant call of a night bird, and our own breathing, too loud in the stillness. Then I heard it. The deliberate sound of movement in the underbrush, drawing closer. Whatever was there had been waiting for us to resume walking. Now it was approaching on its own. "Turn them back on," I said urgently. "Now!" Our lights came on simultaneously, beams sweeping frantically toward the sound. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something retreating into the deeper shadows. Something low to the ground, but substantial, moving with unsettling speed and purpose. "What was that?" Leanne's voice trembled slightly. Before I could answer, a scream tore through the night, human, female, and terrified. It came from somewhere ahead of us, deeper into the woods beyond the road. "Sam!" Leanne bolted toward the sound, her red cape fluttering behind her like a warning flag. "Wait!" I called, but she was already plunging into the trees. Cameron and I had no choice but to follow, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we ran, creating a disorienting strobe effect among the pines. We crashed through underbrush, guided only by Leanne's bobbing flashlight ahead and the direction from which we'd heard the scream. Branches clawed at our clothes, roots threatened to trip us with every step, and the darkness seemed to push against us with physical force. "Leanne, slow down," I called, gasping for breath. The plague doctor mask made breathing difficult as I ran, but I dared not remove it. The glass eye lenses were the only thing protecting my vision from whipping branches. Suddenly, Leanne's light stopped moving. We caught up to find her standing rigid, her beam fixed on a small clearing ahead. In the center stood Sam, her costume torn and dirty, her painted whiskers smeared by tears or sweat. "Sam, thank God!" Leanne rushed forward to embrace her friend. But Sam didn't move to meet her. She remained frozen, staring not at us but at something beyond the clearing's edge. "We need to go," Sam said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Now. Right now." "What happened?" I approached cautiously, scanning the trees behind her. "Did you fall? Are you hurt?" "I saw it," she said, finally looking at me. "I saw what you saw before. It's real, Javier, and it's not alone." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. They're circling us." As if confirming her words, a low growl emerged from the darkness to our left. It was joined by another from behind us, then a third from the right. The sounds were unlike anything I'd heard before. Not quite wolf, not quite bear, carrying harmonics that seemed almost human yet fundamentally wrong. We instinctively moved closer together, forming a tight cluster with our flashlights pointing outward. In the narrow beams I caught brief glimpses of movement, dark shapes flowing between trees with disturbing grace, always just at the edge of visibility. "What do they want?" Cameron's voice cracked with fear. "Us," Sam replied simply. "They've been herding us deeper into the woods, away from the road." The realization hit me with terrifying clarity. We had been manipulated, drawn away from safety by creatures that displayed unmistakable intelligence and coordination. These were not mindless animals, but predators with strategy. "We need to get back to the cabin," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay together. Move slowly toward the road. Don't run. That's what they want." As we began to edge backward, one of the creatures moved into the periphery of my flashlight beam. My throat constricted at the sight. A massive form, powerfully built, moving on all fours yet with a fluidity that suggested it could rise to 2 legs if it chose. Its eyes reflected the light back at me, glowing with eerie intelligence. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows before I could process more details. "They're getting closer," Leanne whispered, her hand finding mine in the darkness. The growls intensified, now coming from all directions. We were surrounded. Our flashlights, once seeming powerful against the night, now revealed only tantalizing glimpses of our stalkers, never enough to fully comprehend what we were facing. "On 3, I said, my decision made. "We run, straight through the gap between those 2 pines. Ready? 1, 2... The world exploded with sound before I could say 3. The thunderous crack of a gunshot reverberated through the forest, temporarily silencing everything, the growls, the rustling, even the night insects. We froze, startled by the unexpected intervention. A second shot followed, this one closer, deliberately fired into the air rather than at any target. The sound came from the direction of the road, where a flashlight beam stronger than ours now swept through the trees. "Javier! Leanne!" Adam's voice called out. "Cameron! Sam! Where are you?" "Here!" we shouted in unison, our voices breaking with relief. The growls resumed, but more distant now, retreating from the new threat. We took advantage of the distraction, moving quickly toward Adam's voice and light. When we emerged onto the gravel road, I nearly collapsed with relief. Adam stood there, rifle held competently against his shoulder, scanning the tree line. "I heard screaming," he explained, not taking his eyes from the forest. "When you didn't come back, I got worried." "Thank God you came," Cameron said, bending over with his hands on his knees as he caught his breath. "What were those things?" Leanne asked, her arm protectively around Sam's shoulders. Adam finally looked at us. I only got a glimpse. Big, definitely predators. Wolves, maybe? But his expression betrayed doubt. "Not wolves," Sam said firmly. "Not like any animal I've ever seen." We hurried back toward the cabin, Adam taking the rear position with his rifle ready. The walk seemed twice as long as before, each shadow potentially concealing another creature. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being allowed to retreat, that the gunshots had merely interrupted rather than ended our encounter. The cabin's lights were a beacon of safety in the oppressive darkness. We rushed inside, locking the door behind us with hands that couldn't seem to stop shaking. In the harsh interior light, I could see the physical evidence of our ordeal. Scratches on exposed skin, torn clothing, pine needles and dirt clinging to us. Sam looked the worst, her costume ripped in multiple places, a long scratch across her forearm that was just beginning to bead with blood. Leanne led her to the bathroom to clean the wound while Cameron collapsed onto the sofa, pulling off his mask to reveal a face pale with lingering fear. "What happened out there?" Adam asked, setting his rifle carefully on the dining table before checking the windows to ensure they were securely locked. I removed my plague doctor mask, grateful to breathe freely again. "Sam went missing. We went looking for her. Something found us instead. Multiple somethings." "I went out to look for the creature Javier had seen before," Sam called from the bathroom. "I thought it was just a story. I didn't believe—" Her voice caught. "She found them," Leanne continued, emerging with antibiotic ointment and bandages. "Or they found her." "I was walking along the road," Sam said, returning to the living room with her arm freshly bandaged. "Just enjoying the night air, looking at the moon. Then I heard something following me. When I turned around, nothing was there. But when I started walking again, I could hear it keeping pace with me." Her account matched my experience from 2 years ago with disturbing precision. I tried to head back, but I got disoriented. Then I saw eyes reflecting my flashlight, too high off the ground for a normal animal. I panicked and ran into the woods, which was stupid, I know. She looked down at her hands. They could have caught me if they wanted to. They were toying with me, hurting me deeper in. "Wolves don't behave like that," Adam said, frowning. "These weren't wolves," I replied. "Not ordinary ones, anyway." Leanne gave me a warning look. "Let's not jump to supernatural conclusions." "I'm not saying they were werewolves," I clarified, though the thought had certainly crossed my mind. "But they weren't normal wildlife either. They displayed coordinated hunting tactics, intelligence. Wolves hunt in packs," Cameron offered weakly. "Not like this," Sam insisted. "They were communicating, planning. One would drive me in a specific direction, then another would appear ahead to redirect me. They could have taken me down at any point, but they were leading me somewhere." A heavy silence fell over the room as we considered the implications. Outside, the wind had picked up, branches scraping against the cabin's exterior like fingernails on wood. "Could they have been people?" Leanne suggested. "Some kind of sick hunting game?" "No person moves like that," I said firmly. "And the sounds they made, those weren't human." Adam checked his watch. "It's almost 4 in the morning. We should try to get some rest. I'll take first watch." "Watch?" Cameron repeated. "You think they might try to get in?" Adam gestured toward the window. "I think whatever's out there isn't finished with us. Better safe than sorry." I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The yard appeared empty, illuminated only by the porch light and security floodlight at the corner of the cabin. Beyond that, the forest was an impenetrable wall of shadow. But as I watched, I caught a flicker of movement at the tree line. Something large shifting position, watching the cabin. Then another movement to its right, and another to the left. They were still out there, surrounding us. Waiting. We established a rotation of lookouts. Adam first, then me, followed by Cameron, with the women exempt due to Sam's injury and Leanne's insistence on tending to her. I tried to sleep during my off hours, but managed only a fitful doze punctuated by startling awake at every creak of the cabin's timbers. When Adam woke me for my shift at 5:30 a.m., the first hints of dawn had begun to lighten the eastern sky. I took up position in the living room, rifle across my lap as Adam had shown me how to hold it. I had never fired a gun before, but Adam had given me basic instructions. Safety off, aim, squeeze the trigger gradually rather than pulling it suddenly. The pre-dawn hours passed with excruciating slowness. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound outside potentially signaling an approach. Twice I rose to check the windows, convinced I had seen movement, only to find nothing definitive, just the forest, gradually becoming visible as darkness retreated. By 7 a.m., sunlight filtered through the trees, revealing a landscape transformed by morning frost. The clearing around the cabin sparkled with ice crystals, beautiful and serene. It seemed impossible that the same peaceful setting had harbored such terror hours before. I woke Cameron for his shift, then joined Leanne in the kitchen where she was brewing coffee. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she'd gotten no more sleep than I had. "How's Sam?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Finally sleeping," Leanne replied. "The scratch isn't deep, thankfully. Probably from a branch rather than—" She didn't finish the sentence. We sipped our coffee in silence, both watching the trees beyond the window. In daylight, the forest seemed innocuous, just pines and undergrowth, nothing to suggest the presence of abnormal predators. "Do you think they're gone?" Leanne finally asked. "I hope so," I said, unwilling to offer false reassurance. "Most predators hunt at night." "What are they, Javier? Really?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Something adapted to these woods. Something that's learned to hunt humans." "But you've been thinking about it for 2 years," she pressed. "You must have theories." I had theories, of course. Hours of late-night research into cryptid sightings, genetic anomalies in wolf populations, even government experiments gone wrong. Nothing had provided satisfactory explanations for what I'd encountered. "Whatever they are," I said finally, "they're intelligent, organized, and they see us as prey. That's all that matters right now." Cameron joined us, pouring himself coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. "Everything's quiet outside. No sign of movement." "We should leave," Leanne said firmly. "Pack up and go while it's daylight." I nodded my agreement. "As soon as Sam wakes up." We began gathering our belongings, moving with the quiet efficiency of people in shock. Adam cleaned and stowed his rifle, explaining that his family had hunted for generations and he'd learned marksmanship from his grandfather. "I never actually shot at them," he clarified. "Just warning shots." "Good thing," I replied. "I think killing one would have made the others more aggressive." Sam emerged from her room around 9 a.m., looking pale but composed. Her bandaged arm was held protectively against her chest, but she insisted she could drive. "I'm not staying another minute," she declared. We packed the cars quickly, eager to put distance between ourselves and the forest. As I locked the cabin, performing a final check to ensure we'd left everything in order, Adam approached with a concerned expression. "Do you smell that?" he asked. I paused, inhaling deeply. A musky odor hung in the air, animal but not quite familiar, like wet dog combined with something more acrid. It hadn't been present when we arrived yesterday. "They've been marking territory," Adam said quietly. "Around the entire cabin. It's a warning." I scanned the tree line one last time before hurrying to my car. The others were already in their vehicles, engines running, waiting only for my signal to depart. As I slid behind the wheel, movement caught my eye, just at the forest's edge, partially concealed by undergrowth. One of the creatures stood watching us, more visible in daylight than it had been in darkness. Its size confirmed my worst fears. Standing on all fours, it easily reached 4 feet at the shoulder, its body lean yet powerful. The shape was canine, yet wrong somehow. Proportions slightly off, limbs too long, jaw too heavy. Its fur was a mottled gray-brown that provided perfect camouflage among the pines. But it was the eyes that froze my blood. Amber yellow and unmistakably intelligent, watching our departure with what appeared to be calculation rather than mere animal curiosity. I started the engine and led our small convoy down the gravel driveway. In my rearview mirror, I could see more shapes emerging from the trees to watch us leave. 3, 4, possibly 5 distinct forms. They made no move to pursue, seemingly content to reclaim their territory. None of us spoke about what we'd seen until we reached the main highway, signal bars finally returning to our phones. We pulled into a roadside diner, ordering breakfast that none of us had much appetite for. "We need to report this," Leanne said eventually. "Some kind of dangerous pack is living in those woods. People need to be warned." "And tell them what?" I countered. "That we were chased by monsters while trespassing at a Halloween party during a pandemic lockdown." "They weren't monsters," Adam said quietly. "Just animals. Unusually large wolves, maybe wolf-dog hybrids gone feral. It happens." Sam shook her head vehemently. "Those weren't just wolves, hybrid or otherwise. The way they moved, the way they coordinated, they were hunting us specifically." "The Rangers should know," Cameron insisted. "Whatever explanation there is, those things are dangerous." In the end, we compromised. Adam called the Regional Forest Service office, reporting a sighting of unusually large predators near the cabin's coordinates. He described them as possible wolf-dog hybrids, aggressive but avoiding direct confrontation. The ranger who took the call seemed concerned but not alarmed, promising to send someone to investigate. None of us mentioned the intelligence we'd witnessed, the deliberate herding tactics, or the impossible size and proportions. Some details seemed too fantastical to share, too likely to undermine the credibility of our warning. As we prepared to go our separate ways, a subdued mood settled over our group. The shared experience had changed something between us, created a bond of survival but also of doubt and unanswered questions. "What happens now?" Sam asked, her injured arm cradled against her chest. "We go home," I said. "We try to make sense of what happened." But I knew, as I suspect we all did, that some experiences resist rational explanation. The creatures in those woods existed in a category beyond our comfortable understanding of the natural world. Not supernatural, perhaps, but certainly not normal. And I knew with cold certainty that they remained there still, controlling their territory, hunting with intelligence that no wild animal should possess, waiting for the next humans foolish enough to venture into their domain. The drive home passed in a blur of fatigue and lingering adrenaline. Every dark shape along the highway made my heart rate spike, though rational thought insisted the creatures couldn't have followed us this far. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had overwhelmed fear, and I collapsed into bed fully clothed. Dreams came immediately, vivid and disturbing, running through endless woods pursued by shadows that moved with terrible purpose. In the dream, I could hear their communication, not in growls but in something more complex, almost linguistic in its patterns. I woke gasping, sheets twisted around me, the afternoon sun streaming through blinds I'd forgotten to close. Over the next few days, our group maintained constant contact through texts and calls, sharing nightmares, comparing details we remembered, searching for explanations that might restore our sense of a rational world. Cameron found news reports from previous years, hikers gone missing in those same woods, bodies never recovered despite extensive searches. Adam researched wolf behaviors and concluded nothing matched what we'd encountered. Leanne spoke with a biology professor at her university, who suggested some form of canine gigantism combined with unusual pack dynamics, but even she admitted the explanation felt inadequate. Sam's scratch became infected despite proper care, requiring antibiotics and leaving a scar that she showed me via video call. 3 parallel lines that the doctor had attributed to a branch, but that we both knew came from something else entirely. A week after Halloween, I received a call from Francis, my cousin's husband. "Hey, thanks for cleaning up so well," he began casually. Lance might head up there next weekend if you want to join him. My throat constricted at the thought. I think I'll pass this time. Everything okay? You sound strange? I hesitated, unsure how much to share. Francis, has Lance ever mentioned seeing anything unusual in those woods? Any weird animals? A pause, too long to be meaningless. Why do you ask? We saw something while we were there. Several somethings, actually. Large predators moving in coordinated patterns. Another silence. Then, Lance doesn't go into those woods after dark. Never has. Says it doesn't feel right. And you never asked why? Some things are better left unquestioned, Francis replied, his tone suddenly serious. The cabin's been in his family for generations. His grandfather used to say the forest had its own guardians, neither good nor evil, just territorial. You knew, I said, realization dawning. You knew something was out there. I knew there were stories, he corrected. Old hunting tales, local legends, nothing concrete. Why didn't you warn us? Would you have believed me? By the way, don't go in the woods at night because there might be monsters. He sighed. Besides, they don't bother you if you don't bother them. Stay near the cabin. Respect the boundaries. We didn't know there were boundaries to respect, I replied, anger rising. Sam could have been killed. I'm sorry, Francis said, sounding genuinely remorseful. Most people visit, enjoy the scenery from the porch, maybe hike the marked trails during daylight. They never encounter anything unusual. What are they? I asked directly. I don't know, nobody does. The local indigenous tribes had names for them, stories passed down through generations. The early European settlers reported encounters too, usually fatal ones. Modern science has no classification for them. But they exist, I insisted. We all saw them. Yes, Francis conceded. They exist, and they've claimed that territory as their own for far longer than humans have been building cabins there. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence, processing this confirmation of our experience. Part of me had still hoped for a rational explanation. Stress, group hysteria, ordinary animals misidentified in darkness and fear. Francis had eliminated those comfortable possibilities. That evening, our group gathered on a video call. I shared what I'd learned, watching their expressions shift from vindication to renewed unease. The knowledge that others before us had encountered these creatures, that their existence was known, even if only through folklore, somehow made the experience more rather than less disturbing. So what do we do with this information? Cameron asked eventually. Nothing, Adam replied. What can we do? Report that we confirmed some local legend about forest predators? We'd sound insane. They're dangerous, Sam insisted. People should know. People already know, I said. At least the locals do. It's why the area has so few permanent residents despite the beautiful landscape. It's why the hiking trails don't extend deep into those woods. They've adapted, created an unspoken boundary. And we crossed it, Leanne concluded quietly. The conversation continued late into the night, but we reached no satisfying resolution. Some experiences defy neat conclusions, leaving only questions and the lingering awareness that the world is larger, stranger, and more dangerous than we prefer to believe. In the months that followed, I researched obsessively, folklore about forest guardians, scientific papers on undiscovered species, even conspiracy theories about government breeding programs. Nothing provided definitive answers, but patterns emerged across disparate sources, intelligent predators that walk the line between wolf and something else, territorial rather than unnecessarily aggressive, possessing communication abilities beyond normal animal capacity. I never returned to the cabin. Lance sold the property the following summer, saying only that it was time to let it go. I didn't ask if his decision related to what we had encountered. Some questions are better left unasked when you fear the answer. Sometimes, particularly on nights when the moon is full and bright, I dream of those woods again. In the dreams, I understand more than I did while awake, that the creatures were neither supernatural nor entirely natural, but something that evolved alongside humans while remaining separate, intelligent enough to avoid documentation, powerful enough to defend their diminishing territory against encroachment. And I wonder, as civilization continues to expand into the last wild places, how many other boundaries we cross unknowingly. How many other guardians watch from the shadows, waiting to defend what remains of their domain. I don't share these thoughts with others anymore. The Halloween of 2020 has become our secret. 5 people who glimpsed something beyond ordinary experience, who carry the knowledge that not all predators have been cataloged, not all territories appear on maps. The forest keeps its secrets, and sometimes, if we're fortunate, it allows those who glimpse those secrets to retreat with their lives, carrying nothing but questions that will never find satisfying answers, and memories that blur, with time, into something that might almost have been a dream. Almost. My name is Daniel Whitfield, and this happened in 2013 when I was living off the grid in a small cabin near Glacier Bay in Alaska. The nearest semblance of civilization lay several miles beyond the coast, meaning my only neighbors were brown bears and scattered spruce trees that creaked against the wind. I'd chosen this isolation deliberately, craving escape from the ceaseless noise of city life, the crushing pressure of daily obligations, and the steady drizzle of bad news that seemed to pour from every screen. I remember that March morning with unsettling clarity. The pale light barely penetrated the frost-covered windows as I stoked the wood stove, listening to the snap and pop of the kindling. Outside, a heavy fog had settled over the landscape, turning familiar landmarks into vague, ghostly silhouettes. I'd spent most of the winter alone, chopping wood, trapping rabbits, and storing dried salmon for sustenance. Solitude had become my companion, though I talked to myself more than I'd like to admit. My technological connections to the outside world were sparse but precious. A small solar panel rig that generated just enough power for an LED lamp and a tiny hand-crank radio. Some evenings I'd fiddle with the dials, straining to pick up broadcasts from Juno, or even static that resembled human voices. Most nights brought nothing but the hollow whisper of empty airwaves, a sound that eventually became as familiar as my own heartbeat. The isolation had settled into my bones by then. I'd developed habits and rituals to mark the passing of days. Morning coffee brewed over the fire, afternoons spent checking trap lines or repairing equipment, evenings reading weathered paperbacks by oil lamplight. My cabin wasn't much. A single room patched together from old timbers, a makeshift outhouse behind a massive spruce stump, and a half-collapsed shed where I hung fish to dry. The space smelled of wood smoke, pine resin, and the metallic tang of cold that never quite left, even with the stove burning. That morning, I'd woken before dawn from a dream I couldn't recall, but that left me uneasy. Something about footprints in snow, about being followed. I dismissed it as the natural anxiety of a man who had gone too long without human contact. After breakfast, a piece of hardtack and some bitter coffee, I decided to check my trap lines and gather more firewood. The day was still, unnaturally quiet even for this remote region. No birds called, no wind stirred the branches. The silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical force. As I trudged through ankle-deep snow, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in my sanctuary. It was mid-afternoon when I found them, footprints in the fresh snow where none should have been. They crossed behind my cabin, heading east toward the dense thicket of alders that separated my clearing from the rugged slope that led down to the bay. They weren't mine. I knew my own tracks. And they weren't made by animals either. These were unmistakably human. Large, heavy boot prints pressed deep into the powder. I followed them for nearly a quarter mile before they disappeared into a tangle of brush and deadfall. My pulse quickened as I scanned the tree line, suddenly aware of how exposed I was against the white backdrop of snow. Nobody should have been out there, not without announcing themselves. Among those who chose this lifestyle, there existed an unspoken code. If you were passing through someone else's territory, you announced yourself in a friendly way. You didn't skulk around leaving mysterious tracks. I returned to my cabin, locked the door, something I rarely bothered with before, and spent the evening by the stove, jumping at every crack and groan of the timber walls. I told myself it was probably just a lost hiker, maybe someone exploring from one of the small settlements along the coast. But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, I found myself checking the locks twice, then 3 times, before climbing into my sleeping bag. That night, the silence that had once offered comfort turned oppressive. I lay awake, straining to hear anything beyond the faint hiss of snow against the window panes. The darkness seemed to pulse with potential threat. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, I slept with my hunting knife under my pillow, its worn handle pressing reassuringly against my palm. I'd come to Alaska seeking quiet. Now I had it, stretching in every direction like an endless void. But something had changed. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied, watchful, as if the silence itself had eyes. Morning couldn't come fast enough. But when it did, bringing with it a pale, watery light, I wasn't sure if I felt relieved or more unsettled. Because in that half-light, looking out my frosted window, I could swear I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just for a moment before it melted back into the shadows of the forest. A few days passed without incident, though my nerves remained on edge. I tried to laugh off my anxieties, attributing them to the isolation playing tricks on my mind. Hadn't I chosen this life precisely to escape the paranoia and tension of civilization? Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted in my environment. While splitting logs one afternoon, axe swinging in rhythmic arcs that sent wood chips flying, I noticed something near the water's edge, a battered blue tarp partially buried in the snow. The sight stopped me mid-swing. I was meticulously organized with my supplies. Nothing was ever left out, especially not near the water where spring floods could claim it. I approached cautiously, half expecting to find signs of a hasty campsite. The tarp had been dragged through mud and snow, one corner torn as if caught on something sharp. When I lifted it, the fabric was stiff with frost, and something else, dark stains that looked unsettlingly like dried blood. My stomach tightened as I turned it over in my hands, searching for an explanation that wouldn't feed my growing unease. Probably just whale blood, I said aloud, my voice sounding thin in the cold air. Some fishermen using this as a processing tarp. But the explanation rang hollow, especially since I hadn't seen any boats pass by in weeks. I tossed the tarp aside and tried to focus on my work, but my hands trembled slightly as I gripped the axe handle. That night, I wedged a chair under my doorknob before retiring to my sleeping bag, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams as wind scraped against the roof like desperate fingernails. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, heavy clouds hanging low over the bay. I forced myself through my usual routine, kindling the fire, melting snow for water, checking my food stores. Normalcy felt like a thin veneer over something increasingly abnormal. I caught myself whispering, "Hello?" into empty corners, half expecting a response. Near midday, I ventured out to collect more firewood. The air held the metallic tang that promised snow, and I wanted to be prepared for another potential storm. As I made my way toward a promising stand of deadfall birch, something caught my eye, a splash of unnatural color against the white and gray landscape. Half buried near a willow tree lay a woman's hiking boot, not old and weathered, but relatively new. The leather still supple despite the dampness, the laces intact. I crouched beside it, my breath forming clouds that dissipated in the still air. Who would leave a perfectly good boot behind? I picked it up, turning it in my hands. Inside, a small smear of something dark stained the insole. I sniffed cautiously and recoiled at the metallic, sour smell. My fingers came away tacky with what I now recognized unmistakably as blood, not animal blood, not the kind I was accustomed to from dressing game, but human blood. "Someone got hurt," I said aloud, the words hanging in the air like an accusation. I dropped the boot and stepped back, wiping my hand frantically against my pants. My gaze darted to the surrounding forest, suddenly alien and threatening. The trees seemed to lean inward, witnesses to something I couldn't comprehend. I stood frozen, staring at the distant mountains, their peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds. Should I leave? Pack what I could and make the dangerous journey back to civilization. But I had no vehicle waiting. My only escape route was my small boat, and with the sea still winter rough, the 2-day journey would be perilous at best, fatal at worst. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to think rationally. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation. a hiker with a minor injury who had changed into dry footwear and accidentally left the boot behind. But even as I formed the thought, I knew it didn't fit. No one hiked these woods alone in late winter without serious preparation, and no one abandoned usable gear, especially not when injured. I left the boot where I'd found it, but its image stayed with me as I gathered wood with mechanical movements, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The silence of the forest seemed to have acquired weight and intent. Each crack of a branch made me flinch. Each shadow movement sent my heart racing. Back at the cabin, I double-checked the locks and positioned myself by the window, rifle across my knees as darkness fell. The short day gave way to a long, tense night. I dozed fitfully, waking at imagined sounds. A footstep on the porch, a whisper at the window, the subtle click of the door latch testing. Dawn brought no relief, only the certainty that something was terribly wrong in my isolated sanctuary. As I forced down a breakfast I couldn't taste, I made a decision. I would scout the perimeter of my territory carefully. If I found nothing more alarming, I would stay, keeping vigilant. If I found further evidence of trouble, I would risk the journey to the nearest settlement, regardless of conditions. I armed myself with my rifle and hunting knife, checked that my compass was secure in my pocket, and stepped out into the gray morning. The air felt different somehow, heavier, charged with anticipation. The forest waited, patient and knowing. I had barely covered 100 yards when I saw it. A dark shape behind a cluster of alder trees, unnaturally still against the shifting backdrop of branches. My throat constricted as I approached, rifle raised, steps deliberate and silent. What I found would change everything. The body lay face down in a shallow depression where snow had melted away to reveal last autumn's dead leaves. A young man, perhaps 30, wearing a green down jacket now sodden and dirty from the elements. His arms were twisted unnaturally beneath him, his legs splayed as if he'd fallen from a height. Even from several feet away, I could see he wasn't breathing. For a long moment I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. The forest around me continued its indifferent silence. No birds called, no animals rustled in the underbrush. Just the soft whisper of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. "Hello?" I called stupidly, as if the man might answer. My voice sounded alien in the stillness. When no response came, of course, none came, I approached cautiously, rifle still ready, though I knew the threat here wasn't from the body. I crouched beside him, noting details with a strange, detached clarity. Unshaven face, dark hair matted with dirt and frozen blood. No gloves on his stiff, pale hands. He wore hiking boots similar to mine, though newer, and cargo pants with multiple pockets. Equipment for wilderness survival. With trembling hands, I rolled him over just enough to see what had killed him. A deep wound gaped in his chest, the fabric around it stiff with dried blood. Not a gunshot. The entry was too jagged, more like a stabbing, or perhaps impalement on something sharp. His face, partially revealed, was frozen in a grimace of surprise and pain. I let him settle back and stood up quickly, fighting a wave of nausea. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold as the implications crashed over me. This wasn't an accident. Someone had killed this man, someone who might still be nearby. And that someone wasn't me. The realization shattered whatever remained of my sense of security. I was no longer alone in my isolation. Or rather, I was alone with a killer. My gaze swept the surrounding forest, suddenly seeing potential hiding places in every shadow, behind every tree trunk. I needed to think clearly, to make decisions that would keep me alive. First, I couldn't leave the body here, not so far from the cabin where I might lose track of it. I needed to keep it in sight, as macabre as that seemed. Not just for any evidence it might provide, but because whoever had done this might return. With grim determination, I grabbed the dead man's ankles and began the gruesome task of dragging him toward my cabin. His body moved stiffly over the rough ground, catching on exposed roots and stones. I'm not proud of treating human remains this way, but fear makes pragmatists of us all. I positioned him near enough to my cabin that I could keep watch, but far enough away that, well, the practical considerations of a dead body and freezing temperatures were something I didn't want to contemplate too closely. I covered him with the tarp I'd found earlier, weighing down the corners with stones. Back inside, I barricaded the door with my small table and positioned myself by the window with my rifle. Questions tumbled through my mind. Who was this man? Had he been alone or with others? Was his killer still in the area, and if so, why? Was I the next target, or just an unfortunate witness? The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. I allowed myself to move away from the window only for the most urgent necessities, keeping my rifle always within reach. As the light began to fade, transforming the forest into a maze of deepening shadows, my nerves stretched to breaking point. Just as dusk settled fully over the landscape, I heard it. A muffled cough somewhere outside. The sound froze me mid-breath. It was unmistakably human, undeniably close. I gripped my rifle tighter, fingers slick with sweat despite the cold, and moved to the window with practiced silence. At first, I saw nothing but the familiar outlines of trees and the dim shape of the tarp-covered body. Then, movement. A tall figure darted between trees at the edge of the clearing, moving with deliberate stealth. I caught only a glimpse, the outline of someone in a thick coat, topped with what appeared to be a strange, lopsided hat or cap. My heart pounded so violently I feared it might be audible outside the cabin. I steadied my breathing, forcing myself to focus, to track the movement as the figure slipped behind a large spruce tree about 30 yards from my door. "I know you're out there," I called, my voice cracking slightly. The declaration felt ridiculous the moment it left my lips, but the silence that followed was worse, a heavy, expectant void that seemed to press against the walls of the cabin. No response came. The figure remained hidden, but I felt its presence as surely as if it stood before me, watchful, patient, calculating. I kept my rifle trained on the tree where I'd last seen movement, arms beginning to ache from the strain of maintaining position. Minutes stretched like hours. The remaining daylight drained from the sky, leaving only the faint illumination of stars and a thin crescent moon. I dared not light my lamp, unwilling to make myself a clearer target. In the darkness, every shadow seemed to shift and breathe with malevolent intent. As full night descended, I heard them, footsteps circling the cabin. Light, careful steps crunching softly in the snow, moving from window to window as if testing for weaknesses. I stood by the door, rifle ready, mouth dry with fear, whispering curses and prayers in equal measure. The doorknob rattled. I nearly fired from pure, startled reflex. "Open up!" The voice was male, steady, and almost calm, as if he were a neighbor stopping by for coffee rather than a potential killer testing my defenses in the wilderness. I remained silent, finger hovering near the trigger. The door rattled again, harder this time. Something scraped against the wood, a knife blade perhaps, testing the strength of the barrier between us. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice surprisingly strong despite my terror. A pause followed, then a sound I hadn't expected. A chuckle, a strange half-laugh that raised the hair on my neck. The casual amusement in that sound was somehow more terrifying than rage or threats would have been. I tightened my grip on the rifle, prepared to fire through the door if necessary. But after a moment, I heard footsteps retreating, fading into the trees. The night stretched endlessly before me. I didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every whisper of wind became the return of my visitor. By the time the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, I had made my decision. I couldn't stay. Whatever was happening here, whatever had happened to the dead man outside, I wanted no part of it. I would take my chances with the sea. First light brought a steely determination born of a sleepless night. I moved quietly, gathering essentials, dried fish, a canteen of water, spare clothes, my hunting knife, and of course my rifle. I checked the bolt action meticulously, loaded it fully, and tucked extra ammunition into my pocket. Whatever awaited me outside, I would not face it unprepared. I listened at the door for long minutes, hearing nothing but the soft sigh of wind through the trees. The forest appeared innocent in the pale morning light, revealing no hint of the previous night's terror. But I knew better now. The wilderness I had sought for its peaceful solitude had become a hunting ground, and I was no longer the hunter. Taking a deep breath, I unbarricaded the door and slipped outside, staying low and close to the cabin wall. The dead man still lay under the tarp, undisturbed. The air held the sharp bite of coming snow, and fog clung to the lower reaches of the forest, creating pockets of ghostly whiteness between the trees. My plan was simple. Make my way down to the bay where my boat was secured, launch it, and follow the coastline south to the nearest settlement. It would be a grueling journey in cold, rough waters, but I saw no alternative. Staying meant certain confrontation with whoever had killed the man in the green jacket, and possibly others. I moved away from the cabin toward the small path that led down to the shore, every sense hyper-alert. 20 yards from safety, I saw him. He was crouched behind a fallen log, partially concealed by morning mist, but unmistakably watching my cabin door. He hadn't seen me yet. For a moment I had the advantage of surprise, and in that moment I took in every detail of the man who had stalked me through the night. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with a gaunt frame draped in a black wool coat patched at the elbows. Heavy boots covered his feet, and a dark beanie was pulled low over a weathered face framed by a beard streaked with gray. His hollow cheeks and sunken eyes gave him the appearance of someone who had gone too long without proper food or rest. But what drew my gaze most was the object in his hands. A long knife with a blade that caught the morning light, its edge visibly worn from frequent use. Our eyes met simultaneously. I registered the moment awareness dawned on his face, followed by something like pleasure, the satisfaction of a predator sighting prey. My heart kicked violently against my ribs. I raised my rifle and shouted something. I can't recall the exact words, only that they emerged as a hoarse, desperate command. He responded by slowly rising to his feet, his movements unnervingly deliberate. Then, bizarrely, he smiled. A polite, almost cordial expression that matched the calm voice from the previous night. The incongruity of that smile froze me for a crucial second. Then he rushed forward with shocking speed. I pulled the trigger. Click. The misfire sent a wave of cold horror through me. I frantically tried to cycle the bolt, to chamber another round, but he was on me before I could complete the action. He struck the rifle with his arm, sending it sideways, then slammed into me with his full weight. I stumbled backward, tripped over an exposed root, and landed hard on my back, the impact forcing the air from my lungs. Above me, his figure blocked out the pale sky, knife raised. I kicked upward desperately, screaming, "Get away from me!" He answered with a grunt, grabbing my jacket with his free hand, dragging me toward him. His breath hit my face, the sour stench of rotten food and unwashed teeth. I struck out blindly, my fist connecting with his jaw, sending pain shooting through my knuckles. The blow barely seemed to register with him. His grip remained iron. He swung the knife in a tight arc. I twisted sideways, feeling the blade slice through my left sleeve and into the flesh beneath. Pain flared hot and immediate. He swung again, and I rolled, feeling the blade tear fabric but miss flesh by millimeters. This was no choreographed fight from a film. It was ugly, desperate, and chaotic. 2 men rolling in frozen dirt and dead leaves, panting and clawing like animals. His weight pinned me temporarily, the knife inching toward my throat. I could see flecks of something dark under his fingernails and the creases of his knuckles. Blood. Someone else's blood. With a surge of adrenaline, I brought my knee up hard into his ribs. His breath left him in a wheezing gasp, his grip loosening just enough. I tore myself free, scraping my palms raw on frozen gravel as I scrambled away. As I regained my footing, he lunged forward again, knife extended. I leapt backward, and in that moment, Providence intervened. He slipped on wet leaves, momentarily off balance. I seized my chance. Grasping my fallen rifle by the barrel, I swung it like a club. The stock connected with his shoulder with a sickening thud. He yelled, the first clear expression of pain I'd heard from him, and the knife fell from his grip. I swung again, aiming higher this time, and caught the side of his face. He collapsed onto his back, dazed but not unconscious. Blood began flowing from a gash near his temple, soaking into his matted beard. The knife lay several feet away, and I lunged for it, but he kicked out, sending it skittering across frozen ground. We circled each other like wolves, both wounded, both deadly. Blood soaked my left sleeve, the cut beneath burning with each movement. He was breathing heavily, one hand pressed to his injured shoulder, the other formed into a claw-like defensive position. I could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing his chances, measuring the distance to his weapon. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice raw. He didn't answer with words. Instead, his expression shifted into something beyond comprehension, a look that communicated he needed no reason, that violence was its own justification. In that moment, I understood I faced something I couldn't rationalize or negotiate with. I feinted toward the knife. He took the bait, rushing to intercept me. His shoulder collided with my midsection, driving me backward. We crashed to the ground together, the rifle spinning from my grasp. His elbow smashed into my shoulder, sending fresh pain radiating down my arm. Instinct took over. My hand found a rock, cold and solid against my palm. I swung it upward with all my remaining strength, connecting with the side of his neck. He gasped, a wet, choking sound, and his weight shifted. I pushed him off, rolling sideways, then scrambled toward the dropped knife. My fingers closed around the handle just as he rose to his knees. Our eyes locked. I saw no fear in his, only a cold fury and perhaps surprise that his hunt had taken this turn. He began to rise. I didn't give him the chance to complete the movement. I rushed forward, knife extended, striking blindly, tears of pain and fear blurring my vision. The blade met resistance, then sank inward. He made a startled sound, more surprise than pain, as I felt the warm wetness of blood on my hand. He staggered backward a step, looking down at the wound in his chest with something like curiosity. I struck again, the motion automatic, desperate. This time, he went limp, falling face first onto the mossy ground with a finality that left no doubt. I stood over him, panting, trembling, the bloody knife still clutched in my hand. The forest had fallen silent again. No birds, no wind, just the rasp of my own labored breathing. I'd killed a man. The knowledge sat heavy and cold in my stomach. After a moment, I knelt beside him, pressing shaking fingers to his neck to check for a pulse I knew wouldn't be there. Nothing. He was gone. Self-defense, I told myself. He had killed that other poor soul first. I only did what I had to do. But the justification rang hollow in the face of such violent death. I looked around at the empty forest, aware that there was no one to help or judge me. I was utterly alone with what I had done. The pain in my arm reasserted itself, sharp and insistent. Blood had soaked through my sleeve, and when I examined the wound, I found a clean, deep slice that would need attention. I tore a strip from my shirt and bound it tightly, wincing as pressure aggravated the injury. I couldn't stay here. Not with two bodies, not with the possibility of others involved in whatever terrible business had brought these men to my isolated corner of wilderness. I needed to reach civilization, to find authorities who could make sense of what had happened. With grim determination, I gathered what supplies I could salvage and began the long trek toward the shore where my boat waited. Each step was careful, my eyes constantly scanning the forest for any sign of further threat. The knife, still stained with blood I couldn't bring myself to wipe away, remained clutched in my right hand, a grotesque talisman against further danger. As I walked, the wilderness I had once found so peaceful now seemed charged with malevolent awareness, as if the trees themselves were witnesses to violence they would neither forget nor forgive. The journey to the shore felt interminable. Every shadow contained potential threat. Every sound signaled possible pursuit. The wound in my arm throbbed with each heartbeat, a steady reminder of how narrowly I had escaped death. Blood had seeped through my makeshift bandage, leaving a dark stain that spread slowly across the fabric. When I finally reached the rocky stretch of coastline where my small boat was secured, the sight of open water brought unexpected emotion, not relief, but a profound sense of vulnerability. The sea stretched gray and forbidding before me, white-capped waves signaling rough conditions ahead. The journey would be perilous, but staying meant certain death, whether from exposure, infection, or the possibility that my attacker hadn't been working alone. My boat, a modest 16-foot craft with an outboard motor I'd painstakingly maintained through the winter, seemed impossibly fragile against the vastness of the Alaskan waters. Still, it represented my only chance. I worked methodically despite my injury, checking the fuel levels, securing my meager supplies, untying the mooring ropes with fingers stiff from cold and shock. As I prepared to push off from shore, I turned for one last look at the forest where I'd sought peace and found violence instead. The trees stood silent and indifferent, revealing nothing of the horrors they concealed. Somewhere beyond that green-black wall lay two dead men. One, a victim I'd never known. The other, a killer I'd been forced to become. The guilt of taking a life, even in self-defense, settled over me like a physical weight. I had come to Alaska to escape the moral complexities of civilization. Yet here in the wilderness, I had confronted the most primal ethical dilemma of all. Kill or be killed. The simplicity of that choice offered no comfort. With a final effort, I pushed the boat into deeper water, started the motor, and guided the craft away from shore. The cold spray stung my face as I navigated through the choppy waters, heading south toward the distant promise of human contact. The journey would take at least a day and a night if conditions held, longer if the weather worsened. I had enough food and water to survive, but the exposure and my injury were concerning variables. Hours passed in a haze of pain and vigilance. I steered mechanically, my thoughts circling around the events of the past days. Who was the man in the green jacket? Why had he been killed? Had my attacker been responsible for other deaths in these remote areas? The questions offered no answers, only deeper uncertainty. As dusk approached, the sea grew more hostile. Waves slapped against the hull with increasing force, sending shudders through the small craft. The sky darkened ominously, not just with the approaching night, but with storm clouds gathering on the horizon. I faced a difficult decision. Continue in increasingly dangerous conditions or attempt to find shelter along the coast until morning. Safety won over speed. I guided the boat toward a small, sheltered cove I remembered from previous explorations. The beach was narrow and rocky, but the surrounding cliffs offered protection from the wind. As I secured the boat and gathered what I needed for the night, exhaustion crashed over me like another wave. I found minimal shelter in a shallow depression beneath an overhanging rock. It wasn't ideal, but it would keep the worst of the elements at bay. Using driftwood and the emergency matches from my pack, I managed to start a small fire. A risk, perhaps, but hypothermia posed a more immediate threat than discovery. In the flickering firelight, I properly examined my arm. The cut was deep but clean, the edges already beginning to close. I cleaned it as best I could with seawater, wincing at the sting, then rebandaged it with a cleaner strip of cloth. Infection remained a concern, but for now the bleeding had slowed to a manageable seep. I huddled near the fire, eating a small portion of dried fish without tasting it. The events of the morning played in continuous loop behind my eyes, the look on the man's face as my knife found its mark, the strange absence of fear in his expression even as life left him. I couldn't reconcile the violence with my understanding of myself. I had killed someone. That fact altered my identity in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by pain, cold, and nightmare fragments where I alternated between hunter and hunted. Dawn found me stiff and fevered, the wound in my arm hot to the touch. I forced myself to move, to continue the journey while I still had the strength. The storm had passed in the night, leaving a deceptively calm sea that belied the turbulence of my thoughts. I pushed off from the shore, motor sputtering briefly before catching, and set course once more for civilization. By mid-afternoon, I spotted the first signs of human habitation. A small fishing village nestled in a protected harbor, smoke rising from chimneys, boats bobbing at simple wooden docks. The sight brought tears to my eyes. I had survived. I had escaped. But I had not emerged unchanged. The next days passed in a blur of official statements, medical treatment, and questioning. I told my story repeatedly to state troopers, FBI agents, and local authorities. They identified the man in the green jacket as a graduate student from Anchorage who had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier. My attacker remained unidentified at first. No ID, no matching fingerprints in their databases. Later, I learned they had connected him to at least 3 other deaths in remote areas of Alaska and the Yukon over the previous 2 years. Hikers, researchers, isolated homesteaders, all found with similar stab wounds, all in areas where a man matching his description had been reported. They never discovered a motive. Some investigators speculated about mental illness, others about some twisted hunting game. The truth died with him in that forest clearing. They ruled my actions self-defense. No charges were filed. I was free to go, to rebuild my life, to try to forget. But freedom from legal consequence didn't bring freedom from memory. I never returned to my cabin. I couldn't face the silence of those woods again, knowing what it concealed. Instead, I moved to a small coastal town, took a job on a fishing boat, surrounded myself with the constant noise and movement of human activity. I built new routines, made casual acquaintances, constructed a life that resembled normalcy. But some nights, when the wind picks up and branches scrape against my window, I find myself reaching for a weapon that isn't there. Some mornings, I wake convinced I've heard footsteps circling my house. The wilderness taught me something I can't unlearn. That the line between safety and danger, between being the hunter and the hunted, is perilously thin. I don't know if anyone ever found those bodies after I left. The authorities mounted an expedition based on my directions, but spring thaws had begun, altering landscapes, erasing evidence. Nature reclaims its own quickly in those remote regions. Perhaps the forest has already grown over the site of my desperate struggle, covering bloodstains with new moss, filling boot prints with fresh soil. What haunts me isn't fear that he might still be out there. I know with certainty he isn't. What haunts me is how easily I stepped into violence when survival demanded it, how natural the knife felt in my hand when driven by primal fear. We venture into wilderness seeking connection with something essential and pure, something we believe civilization has diluted in us. Sometimes we find it, and sometimes that discovery is terrifying. I still feel uneasy in complete silence. I keep a radio playing softly most nights, filling the dark hours with human voices. I've never again lived alone. The experience changed me in fundamental ways, made me more cautious, more aware of the fragility of safety, more conscious of how quickly the veneer of civilization can peel away when circumstances demand. I came to Alaska seeking solitude, seeking the silence beyond modern noise. I found it. But in that profound quiet, I discovered something else. That silence itself can become a presence, watchful and knowing. That emptiness can fill with threat. That the greatest dangers sometimes come not from the wilderness itself, but from what it reveals in us and in others when all distractions fall away. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of those days in the cabin, of waking to footprints in fresh snow, of the weight of the knife in my hand. I wake from these dreams with the certainty that something follows me still. Not the man I killed, but the knowledge of what I became in that moment of desperation, the understanding that within each of us waits the capacity for terrible violence when survival demands it. This is the lesson of true isolation, the wisdom of the wilderness, that we are never as far from our primal nature as we believe, that the line between human and animal blurs when pushed to extremes. It is a knowledge I carry with me always, a silence that never truly ends. I grew up with acres upon acres of woods behind my house in southeastern Pennsylvania, specifically Westbrook County. The landscape was a patchwork of farmland and forest, a place where suburban comfort gradually gave way to rural stillness. A local farmer owned most of the woodland, but nobody minded the neighborhood children exploring the area. Vast fields flanked both sides of the woods, and the farmer had once carved narrow trails through the trees to move cattle between pastures. Those woods were our kingdom. My brother, sister, and I claimed them as our playground, our refuge from the structured world of school and chores. We knew every fallen log, every fork in the path, every seasonal change that transformed our forest sanctuary. A shallow creek cut through the property, offering endless possibilities, fishing in spring, swimming in summer, and what we called mucklucking in the muddier months, wading through silt to catch frogs and salamanders with our bare hands. We ventured there in all seasons, all weather conditions. Snow-covered branches in winter became our architectural challenges. Rain-soaked paths in autumn turned into natural obstacle courses. Sun-dappled clearings in summer served as our meeting spots. I even hiked those woods on moonlit nights as a child, finding the familiar terrain transformed into something more magical but never threatening. The silver light filtering through leaves created patterns I could navigate blindfolded if needed. The wildlife was typical for the region. Foxes trotting through underbrush, raccoons washing food in the creek, deer bounding away at our approach, and squirrels chattering warnings from above. Nothing dangerous lurked there, at least not back then. This was 2018, before coyotes had reclaimed the territory, before I understood that not all wilderness welcomes human visitors. I was 11 years old when everything changed. The incident that transformed my relationship with those woods happened on what began as an ordinary autumn day. Looking back now, I recognize the subtle warning signs we ignored, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath as we entered. But at 11, I hadn't yet learned to read those signals. Mia had been my best friend since 3rd grade. She lived just 2 houses down, and we shared an adventurous spirit that often led us beyond the neighborhood boundaries. That Saturday in October 2018 dawned crisp and clear, perfect for exploration. We packed simple lunches, filled our water bottles, and set out before our parents could assign weekend chores. "Let's go all the way to Vine Hill today," I suggested, referring to our nickname for the elevated clearing where massive grapevines had grown thick enough to support our weight. We'd fashioned crude swings there, testing their strength cautiously before trusting them completely. Mia agreed enthusiastically. "Race you to the creek crossing," she called, already sprinting ahead. We hiked for most of the morning, following the main trail before branching off onto less defined paths that wound upward through increasingly dense vegetation. Conversation flowed easily between us. School drama, family annoyances, dreams of future adventures beyond our small town. The sunlight streamed through the canopy, creating dappled patterns that shifted with each breath of wind. By midday, we'd reached Vine Hill. The clearing offered a panoramic view of the valley below, trees stretching in every direction like a rumpled green blanket. The massive vines hung from sturdy oak branches, their woody tendrils thicker than my wrist. We took turns swinging out over the sloping hillside, the momentary weightlessness bringing shrieks of delight. After eating our sandwiches and apples, we sprawled in the patchy grass, cloud-watching and plotting the rest of our day. The sky remained perfectly clear, an endless expanse of October blue that promised hours more daylight for exploration. "We should head back along the ridge trail," I said eventually, brushing crumbs from my jeans. "It's longer, but there's that weird rock formation I wanted to show you." Mia checked her watch, a birthday gift she rarely removed. "We've got time," she agreed. "Mom doesn't expect me until dinner." We gathered our belongings and started down the hill toward the woods. The moment we stepped beneath the tree line, something subtle shifted. The temperature dropped several degrees, not unusual in the shade, but this felt different. More immediate, as though we'd crossed an invisible threshold into cooler air. More noticeably, clouds began gathering overhead, their edges visible through gaps in the foliage. "Weather's changing," Mia observed, zipping up her jacket. I nodded, suddenly uneasy without understanding why. Forecast said clear all day. We continued down the trail, our earlier carefree mood gradually replaced by a focused silence. The forest had grown quieter too. No birds called, no squirrels rustled through the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, leaving the woods in an unnatural hush that pressed against my eardrums. The path narrowed as we descended, forcing us to walk single file through thicker undergrowth. Fallen leaves carpeted the ground, creating a satisfying crunch with each step. I walked ahead, occasionally holding branches aside for Mia. The rhythmic sound of our footsteps, crunch, 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 became almost hypnotic. Until I realized there was an echo. I stopped abruptly, causing Mia to bump into me from behind. "What's wrong?" she whispered, immediately matching my tension. "Listen," I said, remaining perfectly still. We both held our breath. For 5 seconds, nothing. Then, a soft shuffling of leaves about 20 yards behind us, slightly uphill from where we stood. "Something's following us," I said, keeping my voice low. Mia shook her head. "Probably just a deer. They're everywhere this time of year." To demonstrate my point, I deliberately took 2 loud steps forward, dragging my feet through the leaves. We waited, and seconds later heard an unmistakable mirroring of the sound, something dragging through the forest floor, matching my movement precisely. "See?" "I'm not copying you," Mia said, taking her own step forward. After her movement, we both heard it again, leaves shifting behind us, up the hill. We turned simultaneously, scanning the woods for the source. The forest seemed to darken as we watched, clouds now completely obscuring the sun. What had been merely cool air now felt genuinely cold. My breath formed small clouds in front of my face. "Do you see anything?" Mia whispered. I squinted, trying to make sense of the patterns of light and shadow between the trees. Something moved, or seemed to move, roughly 30 feet away. It wasn't the distinct outline of a deer or fox, but something larger and less defined. Then came the sound that transformed our unease into genuine fear. A deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath our feet. It wasn't the quick, nervous growl of a fox or the warning bark of a deer. This was something primal, something that didn't belong in these familiar woods. Mia's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. Her nails dug into my skin through my jacket sleeve. "What was that?" Her voice had risen an octave. "Don't run," I managed to say, remembering warnings about predators and prey responses. "Back away slowly." We began retreating down the path, eyes fixed on the spot where we detected movement. The leaves there shifted again, parting as though something substantial was moving through them. But we couldn't see any animal, any form that made sense. Just disturbance without visible cause. With every backward step we took, the unseen entity seemed to advance, maintaining the same distance between us. The growl came again, louder this time, a sound that seemed to reverberate inside my chest cavity. It was a sound that didn't belong in these woods, didn't belong anywhere in this region. "Do you see it?" I hissed, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. "I see the leaves moving," Mia responded, her voice trembling. "But there's nothing there. It's just empty space." She was right. Whatever force pushed through the forest debris left no visible outline, no shape we could identify. Just evidence of passage, branches swaying, leaves parting, undergrowth compressing, as though something substantial but invisible was stalking us. The rational part of my brain tried to understand. A trick of light, a deceptive wind pattern, perhaps an animal with coloration that blended perfectly with the forest background. But none of these explanations accounted for the growl, which came a third time, closer, deeper, vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. All pretense of calm evaporated. "Run!" I shouted, yanking Mia's arm as I spun around. We bolted down the trail, abandoning all caution. Behind us, the sound of pursuit was immediate, a heavy crashing through undergrowth, much faster than our earlier stalker had moved. Whatever had been pacing us was now chasing us, and gaining ground rapidly. Terror propelled us forward with reckless speed. Branches whipped our faces as we abandoned the trail for a more direct route toward home. My lungs burned and my legs pumped mechanically. I couldn't risk looking back, couldn't spare the fraction of a second it might cost. Mia ran just behind me, her breathing ragged and punctuated by small, involuntary sounds of fear. The woods I'd known my entire life suddenly seemed alien and malevolent, full of hidden pitfalls and grasping branches that tore at our clothes and skin. The sounds of pursuit continued. Crashing vegetation, the occasional low growl, the sense of something massive displacing air behind us. The distance between us and our pursuer seemed to fluctuate. Sometimes it sounded yards away. Other moments, it seemed almost at our heels. "I can't," Mia gasped, stumbling on a protruding root. I grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. "Don't stop." We burst through a particularly dense section of underbrush and faced a steep embankment leading down to the creek. Under normal circumstances, we would have found another crossing point, but fear eliminated caution. I half slid, half fell down the slope, dragging Mia with me. Cold water soaked through my sneakers as we splashed across the shallow stream, scrambling up the opposite bank on all fours. The sounds of pursuit stopped at the creek's edge. Through the trees, I could make out the disturbance in the vegetation on the far bank, leaves and branches moving as though buffeted by a localized wind. But nothing visible crossed the water. "It stopped," Mia panted, doubled over with her hands on her knees. "Keep moving," I insisted, tugging her sleeve. "We're still too far from home." We maintained a jog for the next quarter mile, constantly glancing over our shoulders. The woods had fallen silent again, unnaturally so. No birds, no insects, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just our labored breathing and footsteps on the forest floor. When we finally spotted the edge of the tree line where the woods met my backyard, relief flooded through me. Sunlight still bathed the open yard, contrasting sharply with the gloom beneath the canopy. Just 50 more yards to safety. Mia stumbled again as we approached the forest boundary, her foot catching in a tangle of exposed roots. She went down hard, crying out in pain and surprise. I turned back, grabbing her arm and hauling her upright with strength I didn't know I possessed. "Go, go, go," I urged, practically dragging her the final distance. We burst from the tree line into the sunshine of the open yard, not stopping until we reached the back porch. Only then did we turn to look at the woods we'd fled. The trees stood silent and still, no sign of movement or disturbance. No evidence of the terror that had pursued us. "What was that?" Mia whispered, her face pale beneath smears of dirt and scratches. I shook my head, unable to form words around the fear still constricting my throat. We stood watching for several minutes, but nothing emerged from the tree line. Eventually, we retreated inside my house, locking the door behind us. For weeks afterward, neither Mia nor I ventured more than a few feet into the woods. Something fundamental had changed in our relationship with that once familiar place. We told our parents we'd been frightened by a large animal, possibly a feral dog, an explanation that satisfied the adults, but fell woefully short of capturing what we'd experienced. When we did approach the forest edge, that sensation of being watched would immediately descend, raising goosebumps on our arms even on warm days. We'd feel eyes on us from the shadows between trees, though we never saw anything concrete. I might have eventually convinced myself it had been nothing more than overactive imagination. Two children scaring themselves with shadow play and forest sounds, if not for what happened to my brother the following month. Blake was 16 and considerably less impressionable than I was. He spent most weekends riding his quad through the more remote sections of the woods, often with his friend Jason. Their excursions frequently took them deeper into the forest than I'd ever ventured, along old logging roads and game trails that extended for miles beyond our property. One Sunday in late November, they set out in the early afternoon with fishing gear strapped to their vehicles. Their destination was a deep pool beneath a small waterfall, about 3 miles from our house in the opposite direction from where Mia and I had experienced our terrifying encounter. Blake returned alone just before dusk, his face ashen and his quad splattered with mud from reckless driving. Jason arrived separately 20 minutes later, equally shaken. They'd abandoned all their fishing gear, worth hundreds of dollars, beside the creek. My parents were furious until they realized something was genuinely wrong. Blake wasn't typically prone to dramatics, yet he refused to explain what had happened until Jason had gone home. Later that night, I overheard him talking with our father in the kitchen. "It wasn't an animal, Dad. Not like anything I've ever seen around here." Blake's voice carried the same tremor I recognized from my own experience. "We were just setting up our gear when the weather changed. Got dark and cold super fast, like someone flipped a switch. November weather can turn quickly," our father said reasonably. "This wasn't normal," Blake insisted. 1 minute, perfect clear skies. Next minute, freezing cold and dark. Then we heard something coming down the trail from the north side. I moved closer to the doorway, careful to remain out of sight. "At first, we thought it was someone on horseback," Blake continued. "The sound was rhythmic, heavy. I called out, thinking it might be Mr. Winters checking his property line." "And?" my father prompted when Blake fell silent. "The sound that came back wasn't human, Dad. It wasn't anything that belongs in those woods. This deep growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once." I felt a chill of recognition. Blake hadn't known about my experience. I hadn't told anyone in the family, afraid they'd dismiss it as childish imagination. "Jason saw it first," Blake said, his voice dropping so low I had to strain to hear. Or rather, he saw the disturbance, like heat waves above hot pavement, but moving between the trees, pushing branches aside, coming right toward us. "Blake, son, there has to be a logical—" "We left everything and ran for the quads," Blake interrupted. "I've never seen Jason so scared. He's on the wrestling team, for God's sake. We fired up the engines and took off, and the whole time I swear something was right behind us, keeping pace even at 30 miles per hour through dense woods." It stopped following only when we crossed Mill Creek Bridge. There was a long silence before our father spoke again. "Look, I'm not saying I don't believe you experienced something frightening, but there's always an explanation that doesn't involve..." He trailed off. "Doesn't involve what, Dad?" "I'm not saying it was a ghost or monster. I'm saying there's something in those woods that I can't explain, and it scared the hell out of me. And I'm not going back there alone." In the weeks that followed, I began researching local history, looking for anything that might explain what both my brother and I had encountered. The county library yielded old newspapers on microfiche, local history books, and collections of regional folklore. I learned that before European settlers arrived, the Lenape people had considered portions of the region sacred, or perhaps forbidden. Early colonial records mentioned areas where the indigenous guides refused to hunt or establish trails. One journal entry from a settler in 1753 described an incident where their hunting party became separated in dense woods. The lost member was found 2 days later, feverish and incoherent, claiming he'd been stalked by something that moved through the forest without disturbing branches, yet left heavy footprints in soft ground. More recent history proved equally unsettling. In 1967, a university research team conducting a wildlife survey reported equipment failures and inexplicable data readings in specific sections of the forest, the same general area where both encounters had occurred. Their report mentioned anomalous electromagnetic disturbances and unexplained thermal signatures before the study was abruptly discontinued. Most disturbing were the occasional reports of hikers and campers who had experienced similar phenomena over decades. Sudden weather changes, the sensation of being followed, unexplained sounds, and the recurring description of displacement without visible cause. Some described it as looking at nothing, but knowing something substantial is there. None of these accounts offered explanations, only confirmation that whatever lurked in those woods had been there long before my family moved to the property and would likely remain long after we departed. Winter arrived with heavy snow that transformed the forest into a monochromatic landscape of white and gray. The thick blankets seemed to pacify the woods, rendering them serene and less threatening. By January, the memory of our encounters had faded enough that Blake occasionally ventured out on his quad again, though never to the waterfall pool and never alone. I maintained my distance until March, when the first hints of spring began to emerge. Cabin fever and natural curiosity gradually overcame lingering fear. One Saturday morning, I stood at the edge of the tree line, watching as melting snow dripped from branches and early wildflowers pushed through the forest floor. Mia had moved away in December, her father's job transfer taking their family to Colorado. Without my exploration partner, I felt oddly untethered, missing our adventures despite the terror of our last outing. Perhaps that loneliness contributed to my decision to re-enter the woods alone. I chose a bright morning, telling my mother I'd remain within shouting distance of the house. The forest felt welcoming again, birds calling, squirrels chattering, sunlight streaming through branches just beginning to bud. I followed our most familiar path, the one leading to the creek crossing. Everything remained normal until I reached the water's edge. There, something shifted in the atmosphere, not dramatically as before, but subtly. The bird sounds diminished. The air grew still. That familiar sensation of being observed returned, raising the fine hairs on my arms. Across the creek, partially obscured by a stand of young trees, I noticed something unusual. At first, I thought it might be a deer standing motionless, watching me. But as I focused, I realized I wasn't seeing an animal at all, but rather an absence, a deer-sized distortion in the visual field, like looking through uneven glass. The water between us seemed to serve as a boundary. Whatever waited on the far bank made no move to cross, no sound to threaten. We simply observed each other across the dividing line of the creek. Minutes passed in this silent standoff before I slowly, deliberately turned and walked back toward home. No pursuit followed. No growl echoed through the trees. Just the prickling awareness of being watched until I cleared the woodland boundary. 7 years have passed since those encounters in 2018. I've returned to the woods countless times since then, having developed a complex relationship with the forest and whatever inhabits its deeper regions. What began as terror gradually transformed into cautious respect, an acknowledgement of boundaries and territories. I never again experienced anything as frightening as that first encounter with Mia. But occasionally, when venturing beyond certain invisible thresholds, I'll notice the telltale signs. Sudden temperature drops, unnatural silence, that unmistakable sensation of being monitored by something just beyond normal perception. Blake eventually told me about subsequent encounters during his quad excursions, moments when he'd round a bend and find the path ahead distorted by that same visual anomaly, forcing him to find alternate routes. We compared notes, mapped locations, and gradually identified patterns. The entity, or entities, seemed to concentrate in 3 distinct areas of the forest, with the creek serving as a consistent boundary. Our family still owns the property. I'm in college now, studying ecology with a focus on conservation biology. My experiences have shaped my academic interests, driving me to understand the complex relationships between environments and their inhabitants, seen and unseen. When I return home during breaks, I still walk those familiar paths. I've developed rituals of my own, small gestures of acknowledgement when crossing certain thresholds, careful attention to subtle warnings in the forest atmosphere. I never venture into the woods after sudden weather changes. I never cross the creek during the darker half of the year. The rational part of my mind has constructed various explanations over the years. Unusual atmospheric conditions creating mirages, undocumented predators with exceptional camouflage abilities, even the possibility of hallucinations triggered by environmental factors like fungal spores or natural gas emissions. But beneath these scientific hypotheses lies a deeper understanding. Some places contain mysteries that resist categorization. The woods behind my childhood home harbor something ancient and aware, something that established its territory long before human settlement, and merely tolerates our presence under certain conditions. I no longer fear it as I once did. Instead, I've learned to coexist with the knowledge that not everything in our world fits neatly into biological classifications or scientific explanations. The forest has taught me humility and boundary respect, lessons that extend far beyond those acres of trees into every aspect of my life. Sometimes, standing at that creek crossing on bright summer days, I sense acknowledgement from the other side. Not friendship, not acceptance, but recognition. 2 different forms of awareness sharing overlapping territory, establishing wary protocols for coexistence. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's all we can ask from the ancient, unknowable things that were here long before us and will remain long after we're gone.